Chapter 96. Along the way, Wu Qi had entered the inner city, and was only about 1 mile away from Duke Yan Li's mansion. Nia Baiheng and Wu Qi were walking side by side. An indescribable joy could be seen on his face. Gloatingly, he said, "Keep this to yourself, and don't ever tell anyone about it." "Ha, whoever dares to tell anyone about this will be in deep trouble. After all these years, I still haven't figured out who is the real mastermind behind all this." Ha, ha, ha ha ha. "You better never tell anyone about this." Wu Qi gazed at Nia Baiheng with a bitter expression on his face. The current sect leader of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect was indeed a stingy man. He had just told Wu Qi some private gossip, and he immediately retaliated by telling him such a deadly secret. This secret was not a big deal, but it was not a small one either. If it was leaked, it would definitely bring him an unexpected disaster. But it was also a thorn in his heart. Actually, it was not a strange thing to tell him about it, as it was about Princess Zhang Li's mother. A barbarian girl who could be offered to the crown prince of Great Yan dynasty by a vassal kingdom was definitely not an ordinary barbarian girl who would run deep into the forest, hit her on the back with a stick, put her in a gunny sack and run away. Among the barbarians, Princess Zhang Li's mother had an extremely noble status, so noble that it was unbelievable. Before the founding of Great Yan dynasty, there was a loose alliance of tribes living in the land of Great Yan dynasty. Those barbarians who were locked in a fierce battle with various vassal kingdoms of Great Yan dynasty, and wars would break out every 2 to 3 days, were the descendants of this alliance of tribes. This alliance of tribes was destroyed by Great Yan dynasty 100 years after the founding of Great Yan dynasty. Countless barbarian tribes were forced to flee into the remote mountains and forests where they originated from. That was the reason why the mountains and forests around Great Yan dynasty were now filled with barbarians. That alliance of tribes didn't have an administrative leader, but only a religious leader. At that time, the noblest religious leader of the barbarians was the lady officiant who was responsible for worshipping the god Wa. The position of priestess was passed down from generation to generation. When the priestess was still alive, there would be a saintess under her. After the priestess passed away, the saintess would automatically inherit the position of the priestess. She would become the religious leader and spiritual teacher of all the barbarian tribes. Princess Zhang Li's mother was the current barbarian saintess. For some unknown reason, she was captured alive by that vassal state and sent to Yan Qijuan's palace. Just like what was mentioned in the previous chapter, Yan Qijuan spent the night with this saintess after a drunken banquet. That was how he got Princess Zhang Lu. It wouldn't be a big deal if it was just that. However, the truth was that the saintess of the barbarian race was an extremely talented person. Moreover, she was born with all kinds of extraordinary abilities. No one knew who did it. In short, when Princess Zhang Li's mother was pregnant with her, someone fed the heaven-defying vitality pill to the saintess of the barbarian race. With the power of the pill, the saintess of the barbarian race fused all the essence, qi, and spirit of the saintess into Princess Zhang Li's body. That was why Princess Zhang Lu was born in her mother's womb after a long period of pregnancy. After she was born, the saintess of the barbarian race died due to the depletion of her blood essence. It was because of the essence of Princess Zhang Li's mother that the Princess Zhang Lu was born. Therefore, the young Princess Zhang Lu was able to cultivate to the embryonic breath realm of the Xiantian realm at the age of 10. She was only 1 step away from forming the Jin Dan and becoming a human immortal. This matter was neither big nor small. However, it was like a thorn in Wu Qi's heart, making him feel very uncomfortable. If he told the truth to Princess Zhang Lu, it might bring him a calamity. Perhaps, Princess Zhang Lu wouldn't care about her mother's background and identity. If he didn't tell the truth to Princess Zhang Lu, it would make him feel very uncomfortable if he kept it in his heart. After all, Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Lu now shared a friendship. Looking at the troubled and gloomy expression on Wu Qi's face, Nia Baiheng burst out into a loud laughter once again. He laughed so hard that he was rocking back and forth. Wu Qi kept shaking his head. As the current sect leader of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect, he was too stingy. Only heaven knew how he managed to cultivate to the Jin Dan realm with such a narrow mind. Sighing and sighing, Wu Qi shook his head and rode back to the entrance of Duke Yan Li's mansion. Upon arriving at the entrance, Wu Qi was struck dumb. A row of dozens of coaches was parked right next to the entrance of Duke Yan Li's mansion. At first glance, they looked inconspicuous, but if one gave them a closer look, one would find that they were extremely luxurious. Even the nails on the wheels were made from purple gold. About 200 guards, clad in cloaks on the outside and soft armor on the inside, looking valiant, were standing next to the carriage like iron nails. Their vigilant gazes were constantly scanning the surroundings. These coaches didn't have the symbol of dark green swallow, which was commonly used by the nobles of Great Yan Dynasty. On the outside of the coach, which was made from 10,000 years old deep water gold sandalwood, hung an inconspicuous badge, about the size of a palm. On a black background, two golden smiling faces were engraved side by side. The smiling faces had gone through an artistic exaggeration and processing. Their eyebrows, eyes, and nose were exquisite and small, and only the two big, smiling mouths were eye-catching. Wu Qi was carefully sizing up these coaches and guards. Those guards had also sensed Wu Qi's approach. A team of 12 guards moved their feet slightly, forming a defensive formation in the shape of a semicircle, facing Wu Qi. The movement of these guards was almost instinctive. They weren't sure if Wu Qi would pose any threat to them, but they had already made the necessary response. Wu Qi gave these guards a deep look, then nodded his head and smiled. After that, he leaped down from the single-horned deer, threw the reins to the gatekeeper who came to greet him, and eagerly led Nie Baihong into Duke Yan Li's mansion. When they entered the mansion, Wu Qi gazed at the place where Nie Baihong had just walked, his heart aching with pain. Just as he expected, the stairs in front of Duke Yan Li's mansion, which were carved with fine jade, and the square behind the door which was paved with a huge amount of money, were all left with deep footprints by Nie Baihong. What a prodigal, no matter where this guy went, he would be defeated. Wu Qi shook his head. Suddenly, he recalled the footprints left behind by Nie Baihong on the several dozens of miles of streets when he walked all the way from the city gate of Ji City. Suddenly, his mood was lifted, and he nearly let out a loud laugh. Taking a deep breath, Wu Qi laughed out loud and said, Yan Fu, quickly inform young master that an honorable guest has arrived. Ask young master to come out and greet him quickly. The white-haired Yan Fu quickly came out from the main hall. He ran over hastily and said, Mr. Wu Qi, master is entertaining a guest. This mister, your humble servant will inform master to come out and greet the guest immediately. Yan Fu had been working as the chief steward of Duke Yan Li's mansion for many years, and he had a very keen eyesight. When he saw Nie Baihong hovering in midair and the deep footprints left under his feet, he immediately knew that an extraordinary man had arrived. Without hesitation, he was about to inform Lu Qingfeng. But Nie Baihong stopped Yan Fu with his words. He said with an indifferent tone, never mind. Wu Qi, bring me in. Those carriages parked outside the entrance are the carriages of Great Yan Dynasty's Wei clan. Although I'm a cultivator, I know the reputation of this Wei clan. As long as someone is tangled with them, even if he is a member of a duke's clan, he or she will have to suffer a great loss. I'd like to see what the purpose of this Wei clan is. Wei clan. The Wei clan of Great Yan Dynasty was able to make someone from a duke's clan suffer a great loss? Wu Qi was shocked and asked, is this Wei clan a cultivator as well? Nie Baihong shook his head. While following Wu Qi into the main hall, he sneered and said, they are not cultivators, but they have something more powerful than flying swords and magical treasures. Money makes the world go round, and the publicly acknowledged richest family of Great Yan Dynasty is Wei clan. They are the imperial merchants employed by Great Yan Dynasty, and at the same time, they conduct their own business in private. Wei clan's businesses are spread all over Great Yan Dynasty. Not to mention anything else, just the energy stone veins in Great Yan Dynasty alone are controlled by them, and they are the only ones who can sell them to the immortal sects of Great Yan Dynasty. Wu Qi stared at Nia Baihong with astonishment and said, "They control 40% of the energy stone supply in Great Yan Dynasty? What do the immortal sects use to purchase energy stones from them?" Nia Baihong said with a cold voice, "Take Heavenly Spirit sect for example, they use all kinds of powerful talismans to exchange energy stones with them. Another example is Valley of Medicine, they use all kinds of spirit pills to exchange energy stones with them. The people of this Wei clan are greedy by nature, and they are the most cunning and treacherous ones. Furthermore, they are backed by the imperial clan, Wu Qi rolled his eyes, lowered his voice and asked, "Does Heaven-Breaking Sword sect have any special products like talismans and spirit pills?" Nia Baihong shut his mouth and pulled a long face, which was even longer than the face of a donkey. Suddenly, Wu Qi understood why Nia Baihong had such a strong opinion of Wei clan. It turned out that Heaven-Breaking Sword sect was a group of murderers who only knew how to draw their swords and kill people. They didn't have any spirit pills or spirit talismans to exchange with them, and could only rely on the energy stones provided by Great Yan Dynasty every year. No wonder Princess Xianglu could threaten Nia Baihong with the supply of energy stones and magical items. No wonder Nia Yaonu valued Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng so much. Lu Qingfeng had 2 provinces as his fief, and there must be some energy stone veins in his fief. By taking Lu Qingfeng as their disciple, Heaven-Breaking Sword sect would have one more source of resources to develop itself. Furthermore, they didn't have to share the resources with Yanli and the other sect elders. How cost-effective was this? Sure enough, there was no free lunch in the world. This sort of greedy wolf was not given to him for free, and the script of heaven-patching formation that Lu Qingfeng was going to learn in the future was not something that could be taught for free. Twitching his lips, Wu Qi shook his head and brought Nia Baihong all the way to the main hall of Duke Yan Li's mansion. Right when they came to the bottom of the stairs outside the main hall, they heard Lu Qingfeng's displeased voice coming out from the hall, "So that's how it is. So, the one who has their eyes on the few iron mountains and iron smelting fields in my fief is Wei clan's iron shop? Hee, why don't you just say it out loud? Why do you have to beat around the bush and threaten me through Prince Ci, Yenhalua?" He sneered, then Lu Qingfeng cried out again, "After leaving the iron mountains and iron smelting fields, it seems like Wei clan has their eyes on the energy stone veins in my fief, which have been sealed and yet to be excavated. Ha! What does Wei clan treat me as? You want me to give up on these energy stone veins with such a small price? You must be dreaming." A tender and sweet voice that sounded like the chirping of an oriole followed up Lu Qingfeng's words with a pitiful look, "Since Duke Yanlu has said so, what else can I say? But, I've left my clan for an experiential training, and if I can't even complete the first task, my future in the clan will be completely ruined. Can't Duke Yanlu be a magnanimous man and fulfill my wish this once?" She sighed lightly, then continued with a soft and gentle voice, "As long as Duke Yanlu is willing to hand over those iron mountains and energy stone veins to me, no matter what Duke Yanlu wants to do to me in the future, I'll be yours." Lu Qingfeng burst out laughing and said, "Miss Wei, what kind of man do you think I am?" Wu Qi blinked his eyes, then suddenly burst out into a loud laughter. "That's right. Miss Wei, do you think our young master is a virgin who has never seen a woman before? How many gold ingots is the most popular and famous girl in G City worth in one night? You can sleep with our young master for 1 year, and even if our young master has sex with you 3 times in one night, he will only have sex with you for 1,000 times. How is that worth 7 iron mountains and those energy stone veins?" Wu Qi's words were extremely unpleasant to the ears. Suddenly, a loud scolding broke out in the hall. "How presumptuous! You're courting death." A sword beam suddenly shot out from the hall along with an ear-splitting whistle, thrusting straight towards Wu Qi's face. Chapter 97. It was a 6-feet-long cold beam, pale purple in color, and came piercing at Wu Qi's face with a threatening heat. It was not an ordinary flying sword, but a divine weapon that was nearly at the level of lower-tier magical treasures. Ordinary flying swords could only hurt their enemies with their sharpness, but this pale purple sword beam, which contained a high-temperature poison, was still 20 feet away from Wu Qi. However, the scorching heat had already curled Wu Qi's hair. It was definitely a flying sword of magical treasure level. Wu Qi swung the sword of Greedy Wolf with all his might, unleashing a dark beam that spread out like a fan and greeted the incoming beam. A loud clanging noise rang out. Wu Qi's body trembled, and he tumbled 18 times in a row, flying several hundred feet back. He staggered and fell to the ground, nearly falling flat on his face. All of a sudden, his clothes were set ablaze. Along with a loud swooshing sound, his pair of long eyebrows were burned out. His hair, which had just grown out, was curled up by the high-temperature flame and turned into smoke, dissipating in the air along with a sizzling noise. Cursing aloud, Wu Qi's body was shrouded in a layer of mist, as the innate water energy wrapped around his body with a bone-piercing coldness. Abruptly, the flame on his body was extinguished. His fingers were aching, and the sword of Greedy Wolf was shaken by the tremendous force, nearly flying out of his hand. Fortunately, he had unleashed a strong suction force with hand of web to hold the hilt, or else the sword would have been smashed far away. A shocking cry was heard coming from the hall, "How dare you, little brat! Come and die now!" The pale purple sword beam, which was pushed 10 feet back by Wu Qi's sword beam, burst into a blaze. A layer of about an inch thick purple-red flame burst out from the sword beam. Like a flaming dragon, it chased after Wu Qi with a threatening heat wave. But before the sword light could travel more than 30 feet, a white light that was over 10 feet in length shot out from the side and tangled with the sword light. Nie Baiheng, who had opened his mouth and spat out the sword beam, sneered and said, "How dare you hurt my disciple right in front of me? You people from Wei clan are getting more and more disgraceful. I'll teach you a lesson today. In the future, you better restrain yourself." Nie Baiheng's eyes went wide, as a tiny white beam shot out from his pupils to a distance of 1 foot. The sword beam unleashed by him grew more powerful. Abruptly, the white beam split into 3 white sword beams, transforming into a web of light that tightly enveloped the pale purple sword beam. All of a sudden, the 3 sword silhouettes shrunk inwardly. Along with a loud cracking noise, the faint purple sword light was crushed into pieces by the sword net. Countless thumb-sized, purple-red light spots splashed out in all directions. The sparks sprinkled and sprinkled on the ground, burning several hundred fist-sized holes on the ground. A hoarse voice came from the hall, "Which senior has graced us with your presence? Please forgive us." "Senior, Nya, of junior of Nye 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 Nye." Nie Baiheng snorted coldly, then beckoned Wu Qi and Yan Fu into the guest hall. Lu Qingfeng had long come forward to greet them. Reverently, he arranged Nie Baiheng to sit on the most honorable seat of the host, while Yan Fu was busying himself inside and out. The serving ladies of Duke Yan Li's mansion strode into the hall with quick steps like butterflies, serving top-grade fragrant tea and all kinds of snacks and fruits. Hastily, Wu Qi gave Lu Qingfeng a wink, asking him to greet Nie Baiheng carefully. After that, he fixed his eyes on a few men in the hall, who had an unsightly expression on their faces. Sitting on the guest seat, obviously the leader of the group, was the young lady from Wei clan who teased Lu Qingfeng just now. She was a girl with a stunning appearance, clad in a light green long dress. Her clothes were lavish and luxurious, and she gave off an air of someone from a great clan. However, although this young lady of Wei clan was born with a stunning beauty, her pair of sharp and piercing eyes, and her overly thin and pointy chin had filled her with an aggressive aura, which made her look less adorable and gentle like a girl. She was a girl with an extremely domineering aura, and a strong sense of superiority. Standing next to her in a straight line were 8 old men, who were brimming with spirit energy and blood essence. All of them had the cultivation base of embryonic breath tier of Xiantian realm. However, as they were fed with spirit pills and spirit medicines to replenish their blood and energy essence, their faces didn't look withered. Their skin was glossy and rosy, and they looked as energetic as young men. However, a trace of blood could be seen hanging on the corner of one of the old men's mouth, and his rosy face had turned a little green. Obviously, his divine sense had been damaged after Nye Baihong shattered his sword beam. However, even though Nye Baihong had taught a lesson to his right-hand guard, and even his guard had begged for mercy, this lady was still standing high and mighty. She tilted her chin up proudly, using a disdainful gaze to size up Nye Baihong, who was emanating a faint aura that only human immortals of Gold Core realm. As for Wu Qi, who was sizing her up, she did not pay any attention to him at all. His eyebrows and hair were completely burned off, and the clothes on his upper body were burned into ashes as well. At this moment, Wu Qi, who was only wearing a cloak, looked really ugly. He touched his bald head, gave a few more glances at the girl, smiled and asked, "Young master, what is going on here? This girl is trying to forcefully buy the iron ores and energy stone veins in your fief? That won't do, as we are counting on these things to feed our families." Before Lu Qingfeng could answer, the girl had already burst out into a loud laughter. "Interesting, this is really interesting. I suppose this is Mr. Wu Qi, the chief hanger-on of Duke Yanluo. Frankly speaking, if we, Wei clan, speak up, the iron ingots and energy stones found in Duke Yanli's fief will never be able to be sold to anyone. If you want to feed your families with these things, you will have to eat iron ingots and energy stones. Presumptuous." Nye Baihong snorted with a deep voice and said, "Slap yourself 3 times, or don't blame me for being merciless with my sword." Wu Qi smiled, took a few steps back, and gave the initiative to Nye Baihong. He truly deserved to be the current sect leader of Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect. With just a few words, he had forced the girl into a dead end. Either she opened her mouth, or Nye Baihong would draw his sword and kill her. Being fierce and ferocious had its own advantages. Sometimes, being unreasonable could be the biggest reason. The one with the bigger fist was the boss. Suddenly, Wu Qi had a deep understanding of the essence of this saying. Obviously, the girl was stunned by Nye Baihong. She opened her mouth and remained silent for a while. Then, she slightly nodded her sharp chin, rose to her feet and bowed to Nye Baihong. "Senior, I'm Wei Xiaoxiao. From now on, I'll be responsible for all the affairs of Wei clan's merchant in Great Yan Dynasty. May I know your name, senior?" Nye Baihong closed his eyes, sneered, and said without giving Wei Xiaoxiao any face, "Slap yourself 18 times. Or else, I'll kill you immediately." Wei Xiaoxiao's body trembled. Her eyes went wide as she stared at Nye Baihong and said furiously, "Senior, do you know that Xiaoxiao is from Wei clan?" "We, Wei clan." Nye Baihong's eyes went wide. He circulated his Jin Dan energy and cried out furiously, "You, Wei clan, are just some peddlers who buy low and sell high. What gives you the right to be so presumptuous in front of me? So what if I kill you today? Don't tell me that you, Wei clan, still dare to declare war on Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect?" Amidst the furious roar, Nye Baihong opened his mouth and shot out a beam of white light, slashing towards Wei Xiaoxiao's neck at an incredible speed. Lu Qingfeng nearly clapped his hands and laughed out loud. Today, when Wei Xiaoxiao came to visit, she had used a domineering attitude to force him to cooperate with Wei clan. As for the so-called cooperation, it was actually to seize the management rights of those most valuable mineral resources in Lu Qingfeng's fief, and leave Lu Qingfeng with some worthless junk. As Lu Qingfeng did not know the exact background of Lu clan, he had been acting very cautiously and was almost willing to compromise. However, Wei Xiaoxiao was insatiable, pushing him step by step, not giving him any leeway. At this moment, when Lu Qingfeng saw Nye Baihong unleashing his sword beams and killing people in such a wild and unrestrained manner, if not because of his status, Lu Qingfeng would have applauded and cheered like a commoner in the marketplace, and smashed a few teacups and fruit plates in front of him, venting the suffocating anger in his heart. Wei Xiaoxiao screamed out in fear. Did Nye Baihong really have the guts to kill people? Especially, did Nye Baihong really have the guts to kill her? She was the most outstanding member among the younger generation of Wei clan. No matter it was her business methods or other aspects, she was the cream of the crop. That was the reason why she was chosen by her clan to be the person in charge of all the merchants in Great Yen Dynasty. In the future, she would have to shoulder a greater responsibility, and be put in an important position by her clan. How could Nye Baihong kill a talented elite like her, a daughter from a wealthy clan who was born in an excellent family? Suddenly, 7 sword beams were unleashed from around Wei Xiaoxiao's body. The 8 guards standing next to her cried out at the same time, "Taibai, god of slaughter! Retreat now, young master!" The old man whose sword beams were shattered by Nye Baihong just now grabbed Wei Xiaoxiao up, hugged her waist, spun and fled. Although his flying sword was destroyed, this old man still had the cultivation base of embryonic breath tier of Xiantian realm. He could control his energy and glide for a short distance of 3 to 5 miles. Holding Wei Xiaoxiao in his arms, he leaped up and dashed out of the guest hall, and in just a blink of an eye, they were almost out of Duke Yan Li's mansion. Looking at the 7 sword beams shooting towards his face, Nye Baihong's long hair that hung loosely over his shoulders stood up. He cried out with a stern voice, "How dare a grain of rice shine brilliantly? He, all of you are going to die now. My disciple Wu Qi, when I capture that Wei Xiaoxiao, I want you to give her 108 slaps." 3 sword beams whistled out from above his head, transforming into countless wisps of white mist that drifted down from the sky. Nye Baihong opened his mouth and spat out 6 white beams. Together with the white beam he spat out earlier, they fused the scattered white mist into the sword beams. The 7 white beams grew mightily, like 7 raging dragons, tangling with the sword beams unleashed by the 7 old men. The flying swords wielded by these old men possessed a power close to that of lower-tier magical treasures. Obviously, they were divine weapons that Wei clan had spent a fortune to purchase. However, the grand white sword wielded by Nye Baihong was left behind by an ancient immortal, and his sword control technique was even more ingenious. Furthermore, his cultivation base was also at the Jin Dan realm, while these old men merely had the cultivation base of embryonic breath tier of Xiantian realm. The gap between their overall strength was like 108,000 miles. When the 7 white beams shot out, the sword beams unleashed by these old men immediately dimmed down. Their bodies trembled, as if they were struck by a thunderbolt. They staggered back quickly, while blood kept bursting out from their 7 apertures. Nye Baihong let out a wild laugh. The sword beams shone brightly, as the 7 white beams pressed inwards, and 14 pieces of scrap iron fell to the ground. All the flying swords wielded by these old men were broken by him. Die! Nye Baihong narrowed his eyes, and his pupils abruptly turned blood red. 7 white beams shot out like 7 white beams, and 7 heads flew up into the sky together with a towering pillar of blood. Fresh blood and heads were seen rolling and splattering all over the ground. Wei Xiaoxiao's guards could only block Nye Baihong's attack for a split second, and were all killed by him. Laughing wildly, Nye Baihong transformed into a white beam and chased after Wei Xiaoxiao. Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng hastily followed behind him, as they wanted to see how Nye Baihong was going to deal with Wei Xiaoxiao, this extremely overbearing girl. In just a blink of an eye, the last guard of Wei Xiaoxiao was killed by Nye Baihong with a palm strike, while she was being dragged by Nye Baihong by the neck. When facing a Jin Dan realm human immortal, Wei Xiaoxiao did not even have the chance to escape. She let out a hideous laugh, and was about to deal with Wei Xiaoxiao, whose face was as pale as a piece of paper. Suddenly, a large sheet of dark clouds came rolling and rocking in the sky at top speed. A frightening pressure was gathering towards Ji City from all directions. Countless lightning bolts were seen rolling and rocking in the dark clouds, and the faint rumbling of thunder could be heard, causing one's heart to feel heavy. Gradually, the dark clouds turned into a cloud vortex that measured several hundred miles in diameter. After that, the cloud vortex began to shrink rapidly, and very soon, it was only tens of miles in diameter. Nye Baihong cried out in surprise, "Jin Dan Thunder Tribulation. Is there anyone in Ji City who has formed the Jin Dan Tribulation?" Chapter 98. Standing at the top of the tallest pavilion in Duke Yen Li's mansion, the company gazed into the distance. The eye of the dark cloud was aiming right at the imperial palace of Great Yen Dynasty. Large patches of sunlight brushed past the edges of the dark clouds, which were getting smaller and smaller, and shone on the buildings of the imperial palace. The greenish-black glazed tiles reflected a dazzling light. When the vortex shrunk to about a mile in diameter, a dazzling light suddenly burst out from the imperial palace. 63 layers of light enveloped the entire palace. The dull sound of thunder came from the sky, as if countless burly men were beating war drums. The dull sound of thunder became one, causing people's hearts to beat wildly. Even with Wu Qi's cultivation, the sound of thunder caused the qi and blood in his body to circulate uncontrollably. His nostrils felt hot and he nearly had a nosebleed. Wei Xiaoxiao, who had fallen on the roof and had her body restrained by Nie Baihong, was in an even worse condition. Her eyes rolled back and she fainted, while blood kept trickling down from the corner of her mouth. However, the few people on the roof, no matter it was Nie Baihong, Wu Qi, or Lu Qingfeng, all of them were men with a firm and unswerving character. None of them gave Wei Xiaoxiao a second glance, as if this peerless beauty lying on the roof did not exist at all. Not to mention that she was only vomiting blood, even if she was struck into pieces by lightning, the three of them would not have the slightest bit of mercy. Who in the palace has formed the Jin Dan? Why was this lightning tribulation so strange? It's been charging for a quarter of an hour, why hasn't the lightning struck yet? With a puzzled expression, Nie Baihong stared at the direction of the imperial palace. Based on his experience, he began to calculate the situation of the thunder tribulation. When an ordinary cultivator forms the Jin Dan and transforms the body of a Daoist into the body of a human immortal, he will only have to face 3 ordinary thunder tribulations. But today, something is wrong, very wrong. Nie Baihong kept shaking his head as he murmured under his breath, in the past, when I was facing my tribulation, the thundercloud only brewed for the time it took to finish a pot of tea before falling down. But today, something is wrong, very wrong. Could it be that some demon ghost kept in the imperial palace has formed the Jin Dan? Or was a demonic beast about to transform? Otherwise, how could this happen? Looking at the tribulation cloud hovering in the sky, Wu Qi felt refreshed and relaxed. He did not feel nervous and restrained like Nie Baihong, as if he was facing a formidable enemy. According to the scroll of stealing, after forming the Jin Dan, there was a mystic technique called the thunder stealing technique of 5 elements. It was a technique that allowed one to steal the heavenly thunders from all kinds of thunder tribulations of cultivators, and use the mighty force of the heaven and earth to temper one's body, Jin Dan, and soul, tempering one's body to an unbelievable level. Putting aside the physical body in Jin Dan stage, with the cultivation of the thunder stealing spell, as long as there were enough thunder tribulations, with the help of the heavenly thunder divine power, one could even form a primordial spirit in the Jin Dan stage. Primordial spirit was something that could only be cultivated by earth immortals at the late stage of nascent soul. Once the primordial spirit was formed, it would be considered as an immortal. The scroll of stealing was indeed a heaven-defying ability, as it was able to forcibly form a thread of nascent divinity with just a cultivation base of Jin Dan realm. Therefore, when Wu Qi saw the rolling and rumbling thunderbolts in the sky, he felt that the heavenly thunder was so kind and lovely. Suddenly, Wu Qi fell in love with Ji City, deeply in love with this city. Once he formed the Jin Dan stage, it would be even better if there were a few cultivators who could face their tribulation every month. With that, he would be able to make a fortune. Although it was just a tiny thread of nascent divinity in Jin Dan realm, with this thread of nascent divinity, how many things could Wu Qi do? After another full hour, Nie Baihong's face had turned as pale as the snow. He murmured to himself, could it not be the thunder tribulation of Jin Dan? Could it be the legendary thunder tribulation of nascent soul? Impossible. According to the records, even if it is the thunder tribulation of nascent soul, it won't take more than an hour to accumulate its power. Right after Nie Baihong's voice faded away, a strong light suddenly enveloped the entire Ji city from the sky. A thunderbolt, about 10 feet in diameter and 7 to 8 miles in length, surrounded by countless crimson fireballs, came smashing down from the eye of the cloud with a loud rumble, thrusting straight towards somewhere in the backyard of Great Yen Imperial Palace. The halos above the Imperial Palace suddenly shone brightly. Layers upon layers of halos stretched up into the sky like an inflated balloon, bringing with them a large sheet of light rain. In just a blink of an eye, the thunderbolt had smashed onto these halos. A loud boom was heard, and the entire Ji city trembled for a moment. The tiles on the roof of Duke Yen Li's mansion leaped up a few inches into the air, and many of them even fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. The servants and serving ladies in the mansion screamed out loudly. Many of them fell to the ground, and didn't have the strength to stand back up for a long time. Instinctively, Wu Qi could sense a tremendous force falling down from the sky. After that, he saw the thunderbolt shatter 18 layers of halos in a row like a hot knife through butter, and only then was it gradually neutralized by the halos. On the wall of the Imperial Palace in the distance, he could vaguely see some human bodies flying up into the sky. They were the soldiers who were stationed in the Imperial Palace, sent flying away by the shockwaves caused by the collision between the thunderbolt and the defensive mechanism of the Imperial Palace. Judging from the height of the wall, these soldiers would at least have a few broken bones. While he was calculating how much damage this thunderbolt had caused to the Imperial Palace, another 8 thunderbolts came whistling down from the eye of the cloud. Each of these 8 thunderbolts was thicker and longer than the previous one, and the fireballs surrounding them had changed from red to orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, purple, black, and white. Each of these fireballs contained a frightening force of thunderbolts, and when they came into contact with the halos and defensive mechanism above the Imperial Palace, they would explode immediately. The shockwaves spread in all directions, causing the entire Ji city to tremble violently. When the last thunderbolt, which was surrounded by several tens of thousands of white fireballs, the size of a water tank, was forcefully neutralized by the defensive mechanism of the Imperial Palace, countless white shockwaves swept across the place. The wall of the Imperial Palace facing Duke Yen Li's mansion could no longer withstand the impact. A loud cracking noise rang out, and countless cracks appeared on the wall. A section of the wall, about 2 to 3 miles long, was blown away by the shockwaves. Countless broken bricks and tiles flew a few miles high up into the sky, smashing down towards the direction where Wu Qi and his company were standing. With Nie Baihong's protection, all the broken bricks and tiles were shattered into pieces by his sword energies. However, the mansions of those princes and nobles around Duke Yen Li's mansion were in a bad situation. Wu Qi saw a marquee mansion next to Duke Yen Li's mansion being hit by a piece of over 100 feet wide wall, smashing right into the master's living room in the backyard. The spacious courtyard was smashed into a mess, and at least a dozen servants were crushed under the fallen pieces of the wall. The sound of houses collapsing filled the air. At least 300 to 500 houses around Duke Yen Li's mansion had collapsed. The loss was extremely severe. Amidst the cries and cries of countless people, the swirling clouds in the sky gradually dispersed. Nie Baihong stared at the dispersing clouds in the sky as if he had just seen a ghost. He kept murmuring, "9 heavens thunder tribulation, this is merely the first thunder tribulation after forming the Jin Dan. Who is the one who is facing the thunder tribulation? If he is a human cultivator, how much sin does he have to commit to attract the 9 heavens thunder tribulation? If not for the defensive mechanism of the Imperial Palace, who could withstand this 9 heavens thunder tribulation?" A clear and melodious cry was heard coming from afar. It sounded like the cry of a young phoenix, melodious and sweet, as if a clear spring water was pouring down from the top of one's head, cleansing one's entire body. Abruptly, from the rivers flowing around Ji City, circles after circles of tiny whirlwinds rolled up countless streams of clear water and gathered towards Ji City. A fragrant aroma was slowly spreading out in the air. Countless tiny white clouds could be seen hovering in the sky above their heads, while clean water droplets were sprinkling down from the sky. The refreshing water vapor nourished Ji City and gave it an indescribable sense of vigor. Suddenly, Wu Qi felt a throbbing in his heart. He quickly glanced around, and saw that under the nourishment of the fragrant aroma and water droplets, a large patch of flowers in the backyard of Duke Yen Li's mansion suddenly bloomed. The moss that hid in the dark corners of the walls was growing rapidly, and very soon, the entire Duke Yen Li's mansion was dyed with a pale green color. The surrounding trees were growing taller bit by bit, as if they were injected with a stimulant. In just a blink of an eye, the trees had grown 2 to 3 feet taller. The energies of 5 elements in the air were rippling in an abnormal manner, as if they were controlled by a mystical force. Suddenly, a few big trees that were growing taller were abruptly set ablaze. Right after the flame was ignited, a few houses in Duke Yen Li's mansion were also caught in a flame of several tens of feet tall. Not only Duke Yen Li's mansion, flames were bursting out from every corner of Ji City. First, it was the water, then the wind, and finally the fire. Before Wu Qi and his company could figure out what was happening, the ground suddenly began to tremble. A vast amount of earth elemental energies were stirring restlessly under the ground, causing a nearby street to collapse. All the houses were smashed by the violent earth elemental energies, and at least 2,000 houses and pavilions had collapsed. Before the dust from the collapsed houses could rise into the air, it was brought down to the ground by the raindrops that sprinkled down from the sky. Then, countless sword cries rang out, and the gold elemental energies in the air were stirred violently as well. How many people lived in Ji City, a city that measured 170 miles in both width and length, was an incalculable number. But, one thing was for sure, all the people in Ji City needed to eat. Therefore, the number of kitchen knives, iron pots, and other ironware in Ji City was definitely an astronomical figure. When the gold elemental energies stirred violently, countless roofs in Ji City were riddled with holes of various sizes. A great amount of kitchen knives, iron pots, blades, spears, swords, halberds, and many other weapons were flying up into the sky. Some iron pots were even steaming hot, as rice was being cooked. The entire Ji City was stirred, and countless people began to cry out in shock. The source of the unusual movement of the natural energies should be the cultivator who had just formed the Jin Dan. A thought suddenly flashed in Wu Qi's mind, as he suddenly thought of a person, Princess Xiangluo. His instinct told him that if there was someone in Ji City who could cause such an unimaginable scene, it must be Princess Xiangluo. She was born after absorbing all the life essence of her mother, and she must have inherited some miraculous abilities of her mother. As the Holy Maiden of the Barbarian Alliance, it was obvious that Princess Zhang Li's mother possessed some miraculous abilities. But, it was really too shocking. A cultivator who had just formed the Jin Dan could actually cause such an unusual phenomenon. This was too shocking. At least, Nye Baihong's face had turned as pale as a corpse, and his body had turned stiff and could no longer move. All of a sudden, an extremely strong ripple of energy came approaching from a far distance. A 200 feet long golden beam was seen flying over from the north of Ji City, surrounded by several hundred sword beams that were less than 10 feet long. The golden beam flickered, causing everyone who saw it to feel a piercing pain in their eyes. Instinctively, they had to close their eyes. When Wu Qi opened his eyes once again, the golden beam had vanished without a trace. A young man clad in a dark green imperial robe of the emperor was seen hovering right above the imperial palace. From afar, no one could see how the man looked like. But when he appeared, it was as if he was the only person left in this world, in the entire Ji City. No matter where everyone looked, they could only see his slightly hunched and tired figure. Suddenly, Nye Baihong let out a groan and said, "Emperor Yen Dan, to what level has he cultivated to?" Emperor Yen Dan. So, this man clad in a dark green imperial robe was the founding emperor of Great Yen Dynasty, the man who single-handedly controlled Great Yen Dynasty for over 2,000 years, Yen Dan? Hastily, Wu Qi fixed his eyes on the man. If this Yen Dan was indeed the Yen Dan he knew, then he was a real famous person in history, and Wu Qi had admired him for a very long time. Suddenly, the cheers of countless soldiers were heard coming from the imperial palace. Long live the emperor! Long live the emperor! The cheers of "Long live the Emperor" shook the ground once again. Chapter 99. When they left the mansion, the street was already crowded with countless carriages and people. They were all the nobles of Great Yen Dynasty who were rushing to the imperial palace for the banquet. The clan leaders of over 100 imperial clans of Great Yen Dynasty, many nobles with titles of nobility, the prime ministers and 9 ministers, and the clan leaders and elders of various influential clans, as long as they had the status and prestige, they would all rush to the imperial palace. Wu Qi and his company were seated at the furthest area of the grand hall. Behind Wu Qi were 2 rows of chimes and drum stands, and over 500 musicians were gently adjusting their instruments, preparing to play the song when the banquet began. From where Wu Qi was sitting, he could only see the backs of countless people and their heads. He couldn't even see where Lu Qingfeng was sitting. Nearly 5,000 people had gathered in the grand hall. Apart from those musicians, no one made a single sound. Everyone was sitting on their knees on the soft cushions behind the tables, with both hands placed flat on their legs and their eyes looking straight ahead. After an unknown period of time, a delicate fragrance wafted out of the hall, and a melodious music rose into the air. Many of the nobles in the hall bowed their upper bodies and shouted in unison, "Long live the Emperor." A group of people slowly walked out from the back of the grand hall, and the leader was none other than Yen Dan. This man could not be considered as handsome, and his face could only be described as rough and boorish. However, every single move he made, and in between his eyes and brows, there was a mighty aura that was as strong as a mountain. He was frank, upright, and pure. With just a glance at him, Wu Qi could tell that such a wonderful man was none other than the man with the bleak wind and cold water. A series of footsteps rang out, followed by a 9 feet tall imperial servant, who had a stocky build and a face as red as if it was smeared with blood, strode into the grand hall with 2 jars of wine in his hands. Wu Qi was struck dumb by what he saw. What this imperial servant was carrying in his hands were not 2 pots, nor 2 jars, but 2 jars of fine wine. The height of these 2 black wine jars was over 1 zhang, and the diameter of the jars was about 6 feet. Fortunately, the eunuch had spread his arms and carried the bottom of the 2 wine jars, steadily carrying them in. In the extraordinarily majestic and ancient soaring palace, there was a black table that was 3 feet and 6 inches long placed in front of Chi-Chi. There were already some tableware and wine utensils placed on it. Under the guidance of the etiquette officer, the nobles who entered the soaring palace were seated strictly according to their status. Wu Qi spoke straightforwardly, pointing out the reason why the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect wanted to recruit Lu Qingfeng. Nia Baiheng did not feel offended. He just nodded lightly and looked at Lu Qingfeng. Lowering his head and pondering for a brief moment, Lu Qingfeng smiled and said, "What Wu Qi said is absolutely right. Having sect leader as my master is indeed a good match." Then, he dropped to his knees and gave Nia Baiheng a few kowtows, confirming the relationship of master and disciple. After that, he rose to his feet, pointed at the unconscious Wei Xiaoxiao and said, "I'll have to trouble master to take care of this girl from Wei clan." After tidying up his appearance and changing into the official duke outfit of Great Yen Dynasty, Lu Qingfeng had transformed into a Duke of Great Yen with a dignified appearance. Wu Qi called out to Luo Kadi, Mao Yang, Zhang Hu, Hu Wei, and a few others. Then, all of them changed into their official outfits, brought along a large group of guards and rode towards the direction of the imperial palace. After entering the imperial palace, the crowds were quickly separated according to their status and were sent to the different palaces and pavilions in the imperial palace. It was also the first time Wu Qi had a clear look at Yen Dan's face. He was a young man who looked to be in his 30s, with a handsome and resolute face, but there was an indescribable weariness on his face, as if there were many things weighing on his body and heart. He was clad in a dark green imperial outfit, with an imperial crown on his head. His eyelids were slightly drooping as he walked out slowly, sitting behind a 12 feet wide dragon table placed on the dais at the far end of the hall. Nia Baiheng shook his head, as he didn't take this matter to heart. He pulled Wei Xiaoxiao up, turned to Lu Qingfeng and said, "The purpose of my visit is to take you as my disciple. Heaven-breaking sword sect has a secret technique called the script of heaven patching formation, which is exactly what you want. As the Duke of Yanlu, you have to attend the banquet held by Emperor Yan. I'll be waiting for you in your mansion. After the banquet, you can come back and formally acknowledge me as your master." Lu Qingfeng had inherited the title of Duke Yanlu, as well as the official position of Zhuoguozheng. As the Duke of Zhuoguozheng, who was responsible for supervising the affairs of 37 vassal kingdoms in the west of Great Yan dynasty, Lu Qingfeng had several dozens of subordinates around him. Therefore, Wu Qi and all the others were now holding the position of subordinates in Zhuoguozheng mansion. For Wu Qi, his current position was the kingdom's supervisor under Zhuoguozheng. If he were to leave Great Yan and visit the 37 vassal kingdoms in the west of Great Yan dynasty, wherever he went, his status would be equal to that of the monarchs of those vassal kingdoms. A muffled thud rang out, as Qin Qingshui scrambled out from the crowd. Those who were qualified to enter the highest level of Great Yan dynasty's imperial palace, the Towering Palace, were, of course, the 8 princes, the clan leaders of 100 sects, numerous dukes and marquises, 3 ministers and 9 ministers, and the clan leaders and elders of influential clans. The total number of these top-notch and core nobles of Great Yan dynasty was only about 1,000. As a result, the spacious towering palace still seemed empty. Therefore, according to the level of their status, those who entered the towering palace could bring 1 to 3 subordinates with them. "Your Majesty, spare my life." Qin Qingshui kowtowed to the ground, begging Yan Dan to spare his life. With the title and official position of Duke Yanlu and Zhuoguozheng, Lu Qingfeng was qualified to bring 3 subordinates with him into the towering palace. Following him into the palace were Wu Qi, Zhang Hu, and Hu Wei. Luo Kadi and Ma Liang, who both possessed the cultivation base of Xiantian realm, exchanged a glance with a bitter expression. They had no choice but to obediently follow the imperial guards into the palace that belonged to the middle and lower class nobles and officials. Both of them knew very well that compared to Zhang Hu and Hu Wei, they were not the trusted subordinates of Lu Qingfeng. Naturally, they would not have the chance to enter the towering palace. The dais at the far end of the palace had a total of 3 levels. Yan Dan and his companions were seated on the highest level, while on the second level, 5 long tables were placed in a straight line. 5 men with different appearances were seated behind each of the tables. Among these 5 men, Wu Qi could immediately see the burly man standing in the middle. He was clad in a white robe, with his long hair hanging loosely over his shoulders and a red belt tied around his waist. He paused for a brief moment, then Yan Dan's voice rang out again, "I've been in a secluded cultivation for 3 years, ignoring all the affairs of the imperial court. Today, I'm finally out of seclusion, and coincidentally, Zhang Lu has become a Jin Dan human immortal. It is indeed a joyous omen. Starting from 3 days later, I'll return to the court once every 3 days, and I'll deal with all the government affairs. None of you should slack off, and all the important documents and files for the past 3 years must be ready within 3 days." While Jing Ku was drinking happily, Yan Dan rose to his feet, turned to the crowd of wealthy and prestigious people and said, "All right, rise now." When the chief general of Great Yan, Jing Ku, saw the 2 jars of wine, his eyes immediately lit up. He turned to Yan Dan, smiled and said, "His Majesty knows me so well. With these 2 jars of wine, I don't need to prepare any other dishes. Come, get me a wine cup. Who has the patience to use a wine cup?" Upon hearing Nie Baihong's words, Lu Qingfeng turned to look at Wu Qi with surprise. On the dais, on the left side of Yan Dan's long table was a slightly smaller table. A man who looked 90% similar to Yan Dan, and was clad in the imperial robe of a prince, walked slowly to the back of the table. With a stern look in his eyes, he gave the crowd of wealthy and prestigious people below the dais a glance, and only then did he slowly sit down. Before the banquet began, Jing Ku had placed the 2 jars of wine behind his back. Using a wine cup carved out of white jade, he gulped down 3 cups of wine. Wu Qi did a quick calculation in his mind. Based on the capacity of this wine cup, each cup contained at least 5 liters of wine. The total number of these great nobles and important officials amounted to over 10,000 people. Together with their personal guards, the stream of people, carriages, and horses were moving forward through the streets. If not because the streets of Ji City were very spacious, it would be a big problem for them to pass through. With such a transcendent and unique position, Wu Qi and his company naturally had the right to attend the banquet held in the imperial palace. Wu Qi smiled faintly, nodded his head at Lu Qingfeng and said, Heaven-breaking sword sect is the legacy passed down by the ancient immortals, and the script of heaven-patching formation should be an extraordinary technique of formation. Since young master has joined heaven-breaking sword sect, we can take care of each other. After a brief pause, Wu Qi continued with a deep voice, Heaven-breaking sword sect needs the energy stone vein in young master's fief, and young master also needs the support of a powerful force. Since young master has joined heaven-breaking sword sect, it will be a perfect match for both of us. On the right side of Yan Dan's dragon table, behind the extremely luxurious table, which was carved with flowers, inlaid with gold, and decorated with all kinds of precious stones, sat Princess Xianglu, Yan Zixing. She was wearing a green palace dress, her eyebrows were dancing, and her face was filled with a big smile. She was sitting right behind this table. All the tables in front of everyone in the grand hall, including Yan Dan's dragon table, were painted black. Only the table in front of Princess Xianglu looked particularly eye-catching. Obviously, it was specially made for her. From this, it could be seen that Princess Xianglu held a very high position in Yan Dan's heart, and the pampering she received. All the nobles in the grand hall rose to their feet. Suddenly, Yan Dan cried out with a loud voice, I heard that Yan Buji, the Duke of Yanlu, had drowned? What a joke! No matter how absurd and unruly Yan Buji is, he still has the cultivation base of innate unity God. How could a mere river drown him? The chief supervisor of scouting office's Central Wind Guard, Qin Qingshui, get your ass out here and answer me. The loud slapping on the table startled all the nobles in the grand hall, causing their bodies to tremble. However, Yan Dan let out a loud laugh and said, the chief general's alcohol addiction is acting up again. Ma-yi, quickly serve the chief general some wine. Nya Baihang said delightfully, all right, I'll go deal with the people of Wei clan right now. You just need to attend the banquet in the imperial palace. Grabbing Wei Xiao up, Nya Baihang transformed into a white beam and sped off into the distance. A loud cry of surprise was heard coming from the entrance of Duke Yan Li's mansion, as all the guards of Wei clan who had just recovered from the sudden change of the heaven and earth were brought away by Nya Baihang using his mighty energy. In just a blink of an eye, they had left Ji City. Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng did not agree with Yan Dan's words, but Nya Baihang frowned in surprise and said, Emperor Yan is personally handling the affairs of the imperial court. Nothing has happened recently. So what is there that is worth him personally handling? For the past few hundred years, hasn't he always been the one supervising the 8 princes and discussing the affairs of the imperial court? Although the 8 princes have changed a few times, I've never seen him personally attending the imperial court. The atmosphere in the grand hall suddenly turned into a dead silence, so oppressive that it felt like the rumbling of thunder and flashing of lightning. Amidst the thunderous cheers of Long Live the Emperor, Yan Dan's hoarse and tired voice was heard clearly across the entire Ji City. Princess Xianglu has succeeded in Jin Dan. Today is a joyous day. Gentlemen, please come into the palace and enjoy the banquet. Inform the great Yan dynasty through the communication formation. Let the whole world celebrate together. Right after they were seated, the white-robed man grabbed the wine pot placed on the table and gulped down the fine wine. After finishing the wine in one gulp, the man shook the pot in his hand unhappily, then suddenly slapped the table forcefully and said, You bunch of cowards are getting more and more stingy. Serve me the wine now. The emperor didn't say anything about starting the banquet, but he didn't say that we are not allowed to drink. Chapter 100. Wu Qi lifted his buttocks slightly off from his heels, got into a half-kneeling position, and carefully poked half of his head out. Through the sea of dark heads, he saw Qin Qingshui, who was kowtowing like a garlic in the grand hall not far away. Perhaps it was because of extreme fear, Qin Qingshui's kowtowing was extremely loud, causing the entire grand hall to be filled with a buzzing sound. Soon, a large piece of flesh was cut open on his forehead, and blood was dripping down from it. His long donkey-like face looked even uglier than before. Jing Ku, who was sitting on the second level of the dais, was still gulping down wine from his white jade wine dipper, as if he didn't notice that Qin Qingshui was playing with his forehead on the floor. Next to him was a handsome and elegant middle-aged scholar. His eyelids were drooping, and he was examining a pair of white jade chopsticks in his hand, not saying a word. On the other side, there was an old man with a tall and burly stature, and a middle-aged military officer, who was clad in a black armor and had his hair tied into a bun with a blood-red string, as well. Only the man sitting on the left, a tall and slender man who looked to be in his 30s, looked a little unnatural. Qin Qingshui was still kowtowing and begging for mercy. When the floor of the grand hall was dyed 2 feet red by the blood from his forehead, the tall man, who was sitting on the second level of the dais with Jing Ku and the other 3 men, finally couldn't restrain himself any longer. He rose to his feet, kneeled down and bowed to Yan Dan and said, "Your Majesty, I, Qingshui, have only been in charge of the Central Wind Guard for a few years. I'm lacking in experience, and I have made some mistakes. Please forgive me, Your Majesty." Yan Dan, with a gloomy face, rubbed his brows and suddenly laughed. "Since you, Wu Yang, have said so, I'll let him go. Qin Qingshui, since your patriarch is begging for mercy on your behalf, I'll let you have it easy this time. Within 3 months, thoroughly investigate the cause and effect of Yan Buji's death. I want to see the heads of all the people who are related to this incident after 3 months. If you can't do it, you can go into secluded cultivation." He paused for a brief moment, then Yan Dan scolded with a cold voice, "The chief supervisor of Central Wind Guard is an important position, as he is the eyes and ears of the imperial court in the territory of Great Yan Dynasty." Wind Patrol, what is Wind Patrol? Go back and think about it. The original intention of establishing the scouting office was to allow you to investigate every nook and cranny like a cool breeze. However, you still haven't found any clues about the drowning of a duke. As the chief supervisor of the Central Wind Guard, do you only know how to use human lives to falsely accuse others at the city gate? Wu Qi raised his eyebrows and looked at Yan Dan in surprise. The so-called false accusation of killing people at the city gate was clearly what Qin Qingshui and the others had done when he returned to the city during the day. He didn't expect that Yan Dan, who had just come out of the closed-door training, already knew about it and even used it to warn Qin Qingshui. Just as he expected, Yan Dan continued, "Haoying Zhengqi, as the criminal and court minister, some of the disciples in your clan are really good for nothings. Haoying Fenglong is your eldest grandson, right? This kid is too stubborn and unruly. How can he use the patrol officers of the criminal and court minister to frame someone? I heard that the Hanhai Kingdom in the northernmost region has just discovered a snowfield that is rich in resources. Let Haoying Fenglong build a kingdom there, and let him bring 300,000 people there." A fat middle-aged man, who had fair skin and looked like a virgin, was seen standing in the middle of the 3 ministers and 9 ministers in the grand hall. His body trembled, and he quickly stepped out from the ranks and kowtowed to Yan Dan to express his gratitude. With just a few simple words, Yan Dan had deprived Haoying Fenglong of the right to inherit Haoying clan. In at most 3 days, he would have to bring 300,000 ordinary people and a group of guards, travel several 100,000 miles deep into the land of ice and snow in the northernmost region, and arrive at the snowfield that the Hanhai Kingdom had just discovered, where he would have to build his own kingdom. This was the grace given by Yan Dan, and also the punishment given by Yan Dan to Haoying Fenglong. If Haoying Fenglong was lucky enough, in a few hundred years, a new vassal kingdom of Great Yen dynasty would be born in that snowfield, and he would become the founding monarch of that vassal kingdom, building a valuable foundation, and leaving his name in the history of Great Yen dynasty. If he was not lucky enough, or if he did not have the ability, the 300,000 people he brought would be quickly devoured by the snowfield, and from then on, Haoying Fenglong would no longer exist in this world. Since the founding of Great Yen dynasty over 2,000 years ago, every 3 to 5 years, there would be a large number of sons of concubines from influential clans, or those who had committed crimes and were demoted, bringing a large number of people and guards to different places, going into the mountains and wastelands to build their own foundation. Some of them succeeded, and the current Great Yen dynasty had over 100 vassal kingdoms, and several tens of thousands of cities, big and small, that had yet to be declared as a kingdom. Some of them failed, and no one would ever remember them again. Wu Qi knew about this custom of Great Yen dynasty, to build a city in a newly discovered land, and then build a kingdom. This was the path that many sons of aristocratic clans would eventually take. After all, the resources of a clan were limited, and it was impossible for them to allow more and more of their clan members to enjoy the blessings of their clan. Therefore, risking their lives and leaving Great Yen dynasty to explore the world was also a way out. Not only the sons of aristocratic clans would do this, but many of the disciples from 100 imperial clans of Great Yen dynasty would also make the same choice after they had accumulated a certain level of ability, resources, and connections. But, it was a pity for Haoying Fenglong. Wu Qi sneered indifferently. By sending him to the northernmost region, Yen Dan could be considered as a form of protection for him. If he were to be banished to some place in the west, which happened to be within the jurisdiction of Lu Qingfeng and Zhuoguozheng, Wu Qi would have 100 ways to make Haoying Fenglong and the 300,000 people he brought here die without leaving even their bones, or evaporate into thin air. While he was making up his mind, trying to come up with a way to give Haoying Fenglong a hard time, he heard Yen Dan speaking again. Qin Shui, what is the reason behind the incident with Tuoba Qingye? As a hostage of Xian Kingdom, instead of staying in Ji City obediently, he went out in the middle of the night, and even brought a ballista to assassinate the members of Imperial Clan. Is he trying to rebel? I'll give you 3 days to find out the truth of this incident, and report it back to me as soon as possible. Also, that Tuoba Haofeng, ask him to go to Zhuoguozheng mansion himself and receive 30 strokes of the rod. As a prince of a vassal kingdom, he should not stir up any trouble in Ji City, or else, he will be severely punished. Wu Qi's eyes lit up immediately. It seemed like Xian Kingdom was also under the rule of Zhuoguozheng mansion. Since Tuoba Haofeng had committed a crime in Ji City, according to the law, he should be punished by Zhuoguozheng mansion. Since Yen Dan had ordered him to receive 30 strokes of the rod, if Wu Qi did not give Tuoba Haofeng a good reception, how could he be worthy of the deep friendship between Tuoba Haofeng, who had colluded with Qin Shui and Haoying Fenglong to falsely accuse Wu Qi? In just a blink of an eye, at least a few dozens of vicious and ferocious thoughts had emerged in Wu Qi's mind. 30 strokes of the rod, if he were to calculate with his mind, it was more than enough to beat Tuoba Haofeng to death. While he was pondering whether he should beat Tuoba Haofeng to death or cripple him, Yen Dan had already finished dealing with Qin Shui, and had driven him back to his seat. After that, Yen Dan cried out in an indifferent tone, "Where is Duke Yen Lu, Yen Qingfeng? Come out and let me have a look." Lu Qingfeng abruptly rose from his seat, walked to the center of the hall in a slightly reserved manner, and knelt down and bowed to Yen Dan. Perhaps he was feeling nervous. Lu Qingfeng's etiquette was meticulous, but his movements were stiff like a puppet, making him look very unnatural. On the platform, Yen Dan was looking down at Lu Qingfeng. After a long while, he nodded his head in satisfaction. His voice had become much gentler, at least, it was not filled with a murderous aura like when he was scolding Qin Shui just now. With a smile on his face, Yen Dan said, "Qingfeng, raise up your head." Lu Qingfeng quickly straightened his body, raised his head and looked at Yen Dan. After all, he was born in an aristocratic family, and there was nothing to nitpick about the temperament and image of Lu Qingfeng. Furthermore, because he was born as a bastard, Lu Qingfeng appeared to be much more mature than other people of his age. Although this was the first time he met Yan Dan, and he was a little nervous and reserved, no matter it was his expression or behavior, there was nothing to nitpick about. Nodding his head gladly, Yan Dan said, "You have the look of a talented man. Forget about the title of Duke Yanle, the position of Zhuo is a prestigious and powerful one. Since you have inherited this position, you will have to work hard. I'll give you 1 year to train yourself in this position of Zhuo. If you perform well, you will be the official candidate of Great Yan Dynasty's Zhuo. If not, you will have to live in seclusion with the title of Duke Yanlu." Living in seclusion. Wu Qi took a deep breath. In Great Yan Dynasty, living in seclusion was not a good thing. It was the synonym of losing all power and authority, and living a life of eating and waiting for death. If one had the talent in cultivation, it would be better, as Great Yan Dynasty could still provide him with the resources for his cultivation, allowing him to focus on cultivating the Tao of immortality. However, he would never be able to meddle in the affairs of the court. If he did not have the talent in cultivation, he would be like rearing a pig, eating and drinking every day. The only thing he could do was to marry a few more wives and concubines, giving birth to a few more sons and grandsons for the imperial clan and all the great clans of Great Yan Dynasty. As long as he was a man with a normal temperament, he would never be willing to live in seclusion, as it was not something pleasing to the eyes. It looked like he had to let Lu Qingfeng make some achievements in the position of Zhuo. But, how should he do it? He only had 1 year to do it. In the grand hall, Lu Qingfeng dared not to show even the slightest expression on his face. He bowed respectfully and meticulously to Yan Dan, obeying the order given by Yan Dan. Yan Dan stared blankly at Lu Qingfeng for a while, then suddenly waved his hand and signaled Lu Qingfeng to return to his position. Frowning, Yan Dan stared blankly at all the ministers and nobles in the grand hall, then slowly said, "Today is a joyous occasion. The achievement of Princess Zhanglu in Jin Dan is a good thing. At such a young age, Princess Zhanglu has become a human immortal in Jin Dan. This proves that the destiny of Great Yan Dynasty is at its peak, and the fortune is on the rise." Several thousand people in the grand hall raised up their wine cups, laughed joyfully and said, "For Great Yan Dynasty." A tired smile emerged on Yan Dan's face, then he nodded and said, "Well, since this is a celebratory feast, we shouldn't have too many trifles. I've settled a few trivial matters just now, so please don't take them to heart. Today, we are going to drink to our heart's content, and enjoy ourselves to our heart's content. Everyone, please go home with a good time." Clapping his hands, Yan Dan smiled and said, "Play the music and start the feast. Today is a joyous day for the entire dynasty. No restraint is allowed." The people in the grand hall answered in unison. Sitting right next to Yan Dan, Yan Qijuan, the crown prince of Yan Dynasty, raised both of his hands up into the air smilingly. The laughter of the people in the grand hall stopped abruptly, as everyone turned to look at him. Yan Qijuan laughed out loud and said, "Today, Zhanglu has become a member of Jin Dan. Coincidentally, the famous grandmaster of Zither, Yutan, is currently in Ji City. Today, I've spent a great deal of effort to invite Grandmaster Yutan to perform her performance." The people in the grand hall cried out in surprise. Some young and vigorous men even lost their composure and shouted the name of Yutan, completely forgetting that Yan Dan was sitting right in the grand hall. However, Wu Qi noticed that Yan Dan's face had turned excited as well, as if he too was surprised that Yutan could perform in this grand hall. Wu Qi couldn't help but feel puzzled. Who exactly was this Yutan? Was she a superstar in this world? Why did everyone in the grand hall lose their composure when her name was mentioned? Lu Qingfeng was puzzled as well. He kept looking to the left, then to the right, as he had no idea who this Yutan was. After all, he was just a country bumpkin who had just come to Ji City from a remote place in the Lu Kingdom. How could he have heard of this name that was being praised secretly among all the prestigious clans? Right when Wu Qi was puzzled, and Lu Qingfeng was at a loss. A tune of zither came from nowhere. Like a clear stream of spring water, it spread across the entire imperial palace in an instant. Immediately, the entire heaven and earth fell into a dead silence, and only the tune of zither could be heard. But today, after being stimulated and threatened by the sound of the zither, this incantation was chosen by the subconscious in Wu Qi's soul. The scroll of stealing could steal anything under the heavens. In all the different worlds, there were countless spells that could confuse one's mind. Among them, there were some cultivators and almighty people who liked to use all kinds of bewitching spells to protect their cave abodes and treasures. If there was no way to defend against these spells, how could the scroll of stealing steal anything under the heavens? This minor heaven's 7 deities and devils soul tempering technique was a type of bewitching spell, and it was a very profound and mysterious one. Not only could it defend against all kinds of mental attacks, it could also defend against all kinds of divine sense attacks. Wu Qi's heart sank. Instinctively, according to the method of the soul tempering technique, he condensed his divine sense into the 7 emotions of joy, anger, sorrow, fear, love, evil, and desire. Within his eyes, there were 7 tiny light dots flashing. Suddenly, an indescribable and mysterious aura surrounded his body, and the expression on his face was vaguely filled with an evil aura. In Wu Qi's spiritual ocean, the embryonic form of the 7 emotions deities and devils was slowly taking shape. Because of the strength of his divine sense, the current 7 emotions deities and devils were just 7 drifting shadows that looked like green smoke. However, they were more than enough to defend against the bewitching power contained in the zither melody. Although the zither melody was still as beautiful and melodious as before, it could no longer move Wu Qi's heart. Slowly, he wiped the tears off his face. With a hint of anger, he narrowed his eyes and glanced around. He wanted to see what this Yutan, who used the zither melody to tease him, looked like. His childhood memories were one of the few warm memories that Wu Qi had, and they had been locked deep in his heart. How could this Yutan, with her zither melody, evoke these memories that Wu Qi did not want to recall? How could he not be angry? He was like the most selfish little kid who had his private world intruded, and his favorite toy was touched. Right now, Wu Qi was filled with anger, and he wished he could draw out his sword and kill someone. Everyone in the hall had different expressions on their faces, but all of them were staring blankly. Obviously, none of them could escape from the attack of the zither melody. Zhang Hu, who was sitting on the left side of Wu Qi, had a lustful smile on his face. He was laughing silently with his mouth wide open, and 2 long streams of saliva were dripping down from the corner of his mouth. There was no need to ask. This guy must have thought of his old sweethearts in the brothel all these years. Looking at the little tent on his lower body, it was obvious that he must be having sex with his old sweethearts in the illusion. Hu Wei, who was sitting on the right side of Wu Qi, had his head lowered and a faint smile on his face. A faint murderous aura was being emitted from his body. It was as if he was in a military camp, having fun with his fellow soldiers. Behind his smile, there was a trace of indescribable sorrow. Wu Qi stared at Hu Wei in surprise. This guy's mind was much firmer than Zhang Hu's. Perhaps, he had realized that these fellow soldiers in front of him were just illusions. It was just that he didn't want to wake up from this beautiful memory. How many years had Hu Wei served in Little Meng City? During all these years, how many of his fellow soldiers had lost their lives in the endless barbarian tide? Wu Qi gave Hu Wei a pitying look. He decided to let this man spend more time with his brothers in the illusion, even if it was just for a short period of time. This was a real iron-blooded soldier, and the time to show his tenderness was very precious to him, right? But for Zhang Hu, Wu Qi grabbed the wine pot and slowly poured the wine onto the little tent on his lower body. Zhang Hu shuddered and abruptly awoke from the zither music. He looked around angrily and was surprised to find that he was actually in the hall, not in the brothel in the illusion. Zhang Hu was also a knowledgeable person. He lowered his voice in horror, grabbed his wet crotch, and asked in a low voice, "What the hell? What the hell is this song? Just now, Lao Tzu had sex with at least 100 girls on a big bed. Wu Qi glared at Zhang Hu and snapped, just now, if it was a 7-year-old kid, he could have killed you with a single slash. Cold sweat broke out on Zhang Hu's forehead. He angrily looked around and scolded, where is the damn zither player? Wu Qi did not say anything. He glanced around and discovered that apart from Yan Dan, Yan Qijuan, Jing Ku, and a few others who were still standing on the platform, there were less than 30 people who could still maintain their sanity in the grand hall. Ma Yi, the chief imperial attendant who brought in 2 vats of wine for Jing Ku, didn't fall into the virtual world created by the zither melody either. Like a vigilant old hound, he stood steadily next to Yan Dan, glancing around with a pair of eyes that shone brightly. Princess Zhanglu sat on the dais, holding her chin with both hands, narrowing her eyes as she glanced at all the important ministers and nobles in the hall. When she saw that Wu Qi quickly woke up from the enchantment of the zither melody, a bright smile suddenly emerged on her beautiful little face, and she nodded her head at Wu Qi delightfully. Her tiny red lips moved soundlessly. Wu Qi happened to have learned lip reading before, so he could tell that Princess Zhanglu was cursing someone. What an ugly woman. My father treats her as an honored guest, but Zhanglu hates her. Wu Qi chuckled, poured himself a cup of wine, raised it up and poured the wine on the ground. He told Zhanglu that no matter what Yutan's background was, she would just throw her out like water. She was just a musician, so how could she be compared with her, Princess Zhanglu? Princess Zhanglu, who looked a little unhappy a moment ago, smiled sweetly, straightened her back, and raised her chin proudly. She grabbed the wine pot in a bold and unrestrained manner, gulping down all the wine in the pot. After that, she breathed out a mouthful of wine towards Wu Qi in a very proud manner. Both Yan Dan and Yan Qijuan noticed the little action of Princess Zhanglu at the same time. Both of them turned their heads and looked at her. Princess Zhanglu winked at them and gave them a smile, then sat up straight like a lady. The 5-colored divine ray behind her back swayed and fluttered like a peacock spreading its tail, giving off an indescribable sense of pride and joy. Then, both Yan Dan and Yan Qijuan turned to look at Wu Qi. However, Wu Qi had already straightened his face, pretending to be immersed in the melody of the zither. Yan Dan and Yan Qijuan looked at Wu Qi for a long while, but apart from Zhang Hu, who was silently exercising his internal energy to dry the wine on his crotch, they could not find anything wrong with him. Shaking his head, Yan Dan turned to Yan Qijuan, chuckled and said, "Zhanglu, you've grown up." Yan Qijuan smiled faintly and shook his head disapprovingly. Then, he turned to look at Wu Qi, raised his brows, which were as sharp as blades. All of a sudden, the melody of the zither stopped. All the people in the hall gasped at the same time, while Chi-Chi let out an exclamation. Those young men from the prestigious clans kept sighing and praising, using all the words they could think of to praise Yutan's zither playing, which had reached a magical realm. Amidst the praises from these nobles, Yutan was simply a celestial being, who should never appear in this mortal world. A lady clad in a white dress walked slowly into the towering palace, carrying a zither in her arms. All the nobles in the hall, who were praising her just now, were rendered speechless. They straightened their faces, rose to their feet and bowed to the lady. It was especially true for those young nobles. Like a cock in heat who had just seen a little hen, they tried their best to show off their beauty and appearance, wishing that they could pounce on the lady and bare their hearts. Wu Qi, too, was scrutinizing the lady. She was able to create illusions with the zither melody, and draw out the memories hidden deep in one's subconscious. This was a very powerful enchanting technique among immortal techniques. He really wanted to see what kind of appearance such a powerful lady had. With just a glance, Wu Qi could not help but feel greatly disappointed. The lady had a slim and graceful body, but she was wrapped in a thick white cloak. Apart from her translucent hands that were as fair as jade, he couldn't see any skin on her. She was wearing a bamboo hat weaved from purple bamboo threads, with a 3 feet white veil hanging down from the edge, covering her face. One could barely see her oval face, but couldn't see what she actually looked like. However, such a secretive behavior had added a little bit of temptation to Yutan. Even Wu Qi was tempted. He wished he could tear off her veil, tear off her clothes, and have a good look at her delicate body, and what kind of beautiful face she had. Right when he thought of this, Wu Qi's heart twitched once again. The 7 holy deities and devils trembled, and an invisible evil force covered Wu Qi's spiritual ocean. The cold air refreshed his spirit and brought him back to his senses. The enchanting force of Yutan was so strong that Wu Qi nearly fell into her temptation once again. Taking a deep breath, Wu Qi lowered his head and stopped looking at the lady. After breaking free from the enchanting force of Yutan for 2 times in a row, Wu Qi had consumed about 30% of his divine sense. He didn't want to waste too much energy here. Like moving clouds and flowing water, Yutan walked to the platform at the end of the hall, then slowly bowed to Yen Dan. My humble daughter, Yutan, offers greeting to your majesty. Long live his majesty. Long live. Chapter 102. Chuckling, Yen Dan casually raised his hand and said, Yutan from Zither sect, your name has shaken the world for the past 3 years. Now that I've met you today, you are indeed extraordinary. Ma-yi, please have a seat, Grandmaster Yu. Then, Yen Dan pointed his finger at the dais. Ma-yi, the chief eunuch with a flushed face, hastily beckoned a few young eunuchs to carry a long black table and place it on the 2nd level of the dais where Yen Dan pointed. Then, he invited Yutan to come up to the dais and take her seat. After that, the palace banquet officially began. Yen Dan raised his wine vessel and offered a toast to the heaven and earth. After that, all the important ministers and nobles in the grand hall laughed joyfully, while the group of musicians behind Wu Qi played their tunes together. A fragrant aroma spread out from every corner of the grand hall, while many female dancers gracefully entered the grand hall and started dancing. Everyone drank and enjoyed themselves. It was a joyous and harmonious scene. Yen Dan accepted the toasts from a few most senior ministers and nobles, such as Jing Ku and a few others, then rose and left the grand hall. Following closely behind Yen Dan were the old ministers and nobles, such as Jing Ku. After these people left, the one who hosted the palace banquet in the grand hall became the crown prince, Yen Qijuan. The atmosphere in the grand hall suddenly became relaxed, and the behavior of all the ministers and nobles had become much more relaxed. When Yen Dan, Jing Ku, and a few others were in the grand hall, none of the ministers dared to be too carefree and enjoy themselves because of their lofty status. After they left, Yen Qijuan was the one who hosted the palace banquet. His imposing manner was not as solemn and serious as Yen Dan, and he was much more amiable to the people around him. As a result, the atmosphere in the grand hall became livelier. Music was played in the grand hall, and the palace maids were dancing. One after another, ministers rose to their feet and offered a toast to Princess Xianglu. At the young age of 15, Princess Xianglu had formed her gold core. She had a bright future ahead of her. With the pampering she was receiving now, her power and influence in Great Yen Dynasty would only grow stronger and stronger in the future. Many of the ministers were carefully praising Princess Xianglu with the most beautiful words, hoping to leave a good impression in her heart. They were afraid that if they showed any disrespect, it would make her remember them. However, Wu Qi could tell that Princess Xiangli's attention was not on these people. Her pair of beautiful eyes were fixed on Yutan, who was sitting cross-legged and motionless. The situation was like a beautiful and proud peacock suddenly discovering that another rare bird with gorgeous feathers had entered its territory. It was almost instinctively hostile. Wu Qi was laughing in his mind, women, this is what women are like. Just when Wu Qi was pondering what kind of methods Princess Xianglu would use to make things difficult for Yutan, Princess Xianglu had risen to her feet. She was holding a large bowl that she got from an unknown source. She filled it with fine wine, raised her hand towards Yutan and said, Master of Zither, Yutan. You've made a name for yourself in just 3 years, what an amazing feat. Zisu offers a bowl to Lady Yutan. Somebody, fill it up for Lady Yutan. Since Yutan took her seat, she had been lightly pressing her fingers on the zither strings. Other than that, she didn't do anything else. When many ministers rose to their feet and offered a toast to Princess Xianglu, she just sat on the same spot like an ice statue, showing no reaction. She gave off a feeling like an orchid condensed from the essence of ice and snow, quietly blooming in the depth of a valley, untainted by any human presence. However, this orchid, which was cold to the extreme, was constantly emitting a seductive charm, attracting the eyes of many young nobles in the grand hall to keep glancing at her from side to side. The cold arrogance and the unique charm combined together, giving people a contradictory yet harmonious feeling at the same time. Yutan was sitting there without saying a word, but Princess Xianglu had suddenly pointed the spearhead at her. As expected, Yutan's reaction was a little stunned. She was bewildered for a full 2 breaths of time, then she rose to her feet and said with a gentle voice, "Your Highness, Yutan appreciates your hospitality. But, Yutan doesn't know how to drink wine. I wonder if I can replace it with tea." The grand hall fell into a dead silence. It was much quieter than when Yan Dan scolded Qin Qingshui just now. Far away from the palace, the cheering and drinking voices of the middle and lower level nobles could be heard coming from afar, making the grand hall even quieter. Those young nobles, who were sneaking glances at Yutan just now, had now lowered their heads obediently, not daring to look at her again. Princess Xianglu had a notorious reputation. Who in Ji City didn't know about it? Compared to the deterrence of Princess Xianglu, the Grand Master of Zither, Yutan, was far from being comparable. Princess Xianglu was only a Xiantian realm cultivator, but she could already act like a tyrant in Ji City. Now that she had formed her Jin Dan and become a human immortal, Princess Xianglu was no different from a female Tyrannosaurus. If one could keep a respectful distance from her, one should never provoke her. Even Yan Qijuan, who was sitting on the dais, put on a straight face, shrunk his neck, and turned his head to look at the curtain behind him. He was sizing up a few swallows flying high up in the wind on the black curtain, smiling as if he was praising the exquisite embroidery skill of these swallows. With a charming smile on her face, Princess Xianglu carried the large bowl that could hold 3 liters of fine wine and walked slowly to Yutan. Then, she handed the large bowl to Yutan, smiled sweetly and said, "Grandmaster you are really not giving Zidan face. It is just a bowl of wine, and it is unreasonable for Grandmaster Yu to treat it with tea. Zidan will drink first as a sign of respect. Grandmaster Yu, it's all up to you now." With a charming laugh, Princess Xianglu raised the bowl and gulped down the 3 liters of fine wine in just a few mouthfuls. No matter it was the aura or corporeal body of a Jin Dan human immortal, they were at least 100 times stronger than a Xiantian Taoist. For a human immortal, a mere 3 liters of fine wine was like a 9 feet tall man drinking a drop of wine. It could not be considered as drinking wine at all. Casually, Princess Xianglu tilted the bowl up, tilted her chin up, gave Yutan a sideways glance and said with a sneer, "Today is the celebratory feast to celebrate the completion of Zidan Jin Dan. Since Grandmaster Yu doesn't know how to drink wine, why are you here in Towering Palace?" Then, Princess Xianglu turned her head, sneered leisurely and said, "Could it be that Grandmaster Yu is here to borrow the name of Zidan to make a name for herself in front of all the ministers of Great Yan Dynasty? That is not right, as I hate people who use me the most." Every single word of hers was like a stab to the heart. None of the civil and military officials in the hall dared to say a word. Yutan's body trembled slightly. Suddenly, she sighed lightly and said, "Your Highness, I dare not accept your words. Bring me some wine." Yutan wishes Your Highness the completion of Jin Dan, stepping into the realm of human immortal. From now on, you will live a free and unfettered life, and will no longer be a mortal in the mortal world. An imperial eunuch had long walked up to her, carrying a large bowl filled with fine wine. Yutan took over the big bowl, then slightly lifted the white veil covering her face, revealing her small and exquisite jaw and half of her watery red lips. She bit the edge of the bowl with her little mouth and drank up the bowl of wine without making a sound. When the last drop of wine entered her mouth, Yutan gracefully turned the bowl toward the outside, leaving not even a single drop of wine in her mouth. Suddenly, one of the courageous noblemen in the hall clapped his hands and cried out, "Grandmaster Yu has a great capacity for liquor." Yutan's body trembled abruptly, and Princess Zhongli's face turned as cold as a snowy mountain. Her stern gaze slowly ran across the few thousand noblemen in the hall. The nobleman who cried out just now had long shrunk his body, and no longer dared to show his face. As Princess Zhonglu couldn't find the culprit, she could only vent all her anger on Yutan. Sneering coldly, Princess Zhonglu raised her hand and grabbed Yutan's veil. "Since you're already in the soaring palace, why are you still hiding? Take off your veil, and let me see how beautiful Grandmaster Yu is." Yutan moved her feet, and like a drifting cloud, she slid backward for a few feet, barely dodging the grab from Princess Zhonglu. Princess Zhonglu frowned and cried out with a stern voice, "Somebody, take off her veil for me. Today is my celebratory banquet. Why are you hiding your face with a veil? Are you trying to show off your noble status?" With her order, a dozen imperial eunuchs immediately rushed towards her, trying to capture Yutan in a flurry. Many young and vigorous noblemen in the hall also saw the opportunity to flatter Princess Zhonglu. They were rubbing their palms, getting ready to rush up and flatter Princess Zhonglu at any moment. Yutan gave a loud cry, then turned to Yan Qijuan and said, "Yutan is invited here. The veil is an order from Yutan's seniors. It's fine if Princess wants to take off my veil, but I hope Crown Prince can make the decision. According to Yutan's rules, you have to answer 3 questions of Yutan, and if the answers match the answers in Yutan's heart, Yutan will take off the veil herself. If not, please forgive me, Crown Prince. Due to the order from my seniors, I can't follow Princess wishes." Coughing lightly, Yan Qijuan ordered those imperial eunuchs to leave. Smilingly, he turned to Princess Zhonglu and said, "Zidan, Grandmaster Yutan covers her face with a white veil, and this is the order from her seniors. For the past 3 years, Grandmaster Yutan has never shown her true face to anyone, and it's not because she wants to do so in your celebratory banquet. Since you want to take off Grandmaster Yu's veil, why don't we follow her rules?" He paused for a brief moment, then laughed dryly and said, "Grandmaster Yu is invited here by my father." Coldly staring at Yutan for a long while, Princess Zhonglu suddenly laughed and said, "3 questions? Well, with several thousand pillars of great Yan dynasty here, do you think I can't answer your 3 questions? Today, I'll listen to your 3 questions. Whoever can answer them and take off Grandmaster Yu's veil will be handsomely rewarded by me." Swinging her skirt proudly, Princess Zhonglu returned to her seat and sat down slowly, her beautiful eyes never leaving Yutan. All the ministers and nobles in the hall were looking at each other, and a small half of them shook their heads at the same time. Wu Qi was greatly surprised. Could it be that all these people had heard the 3 questions from Yutan? Judging from the awkward expression on their faces, perhaps none of the answers could satisfy Yutan. His curiosity was aroused, and Wu Qi focused his attention and looked at Yutan. What kind of questions could this lady have? She breathed out a faint sigh, then lightly plucked the zither strings with her fingers and produced a few crisp sounds. She took a few steps casually on the dais, then suddenly asked, "My first question is, what is the most important thing to have a beautiful life?" She sighed again, then continued asking, "My second question is, what is the most important thing to have a long life and a beautiful life?" She glanced at all the supreme nobles of great Yan dynasty in the hall, then asked in a soft voice, "My last question is, if there is a girl who knows you, understands you, believes in you, loves you, spares no effort for you, has been accompanying you since you were young, accompanied you, helped you, protected you, sacrificed everything to help you, what are you going to do for such a girl?" When the 3 questions were asked, the hall fell into a dead silence, as lifeless as a graveyard. All the ministers, nobles, and dragons among men were looking at each other, and none of them made any sound for a long while. Meanwhile, the few hundred dancers and singers at the back of the hall were repeating Yutan's 3 questions in a daze. Their faces looked haggard, and it was obvious that their minds were greatly hurt. Princess Xianglu was sitting blankly on her seat as well. Unconsciously, her beautiful eyes turned to Wu Qi's direction, and coincidentally met Wu Qi's gaze. Chapter 103. The palace banquet was over. The sky was filled with dark clouds, and heavy raindrops were pouring down from the sky. It was as if Ji City was soaked in water, as the air was filled with unbearable moisture. Wild thunders and bolts of lightning were wreaking havoc behind the dark clouds, shaking the sky and making it seem as if the sky and earth were spinning. The lights on the city walls were dimmed, and the pale yellow light could barely shine for a few steps before losing its effect. In such a horrible weather, a great number of soldiers were standing on the city walls like wooden stakes, vigilantly glancing around. In such a weather, some crimes and strange things could easily happen. Therefore, the soldiers had to be on high alert, and nip any bad signs in the bud. When Yan Dan was not out from his secluded cultivation, the defense in Ji City could still be a little lax. But, after Yan Dan came out from his secluded cultivation, if he still idled around like before, he would be courting death. Therefore, a fully armed soldier was stationed on the city wall every 2 steps apart. Under the illumination of specially made torches that could resist the wind and water, these soldiers were keeping their eyes vigilantly on the long lines of carriages and people that were driving slowly through the streets. These people had just come out from the imperial palace, and they were all the influential members of Great Yan Dynasty. If anything happened to any of them, the captain who was responsible for tonight's defense would have his skin peeled off. Therefore, these soldiers had no choice but to be extra cautious. As the weather was not good, the faces of those influential members who had just come out from the imperial palace were unsightly. Some of the young influential members were still sitting in the luxuriously decorated coaches with their heads lowered, mumbling and pondering over 3 questions. The 3 questions asked by Yu Tan had baffled all the influential members in the towering palace. The hall fell into an awkward silence for a full 15 minutes, and none of them rose to their feet to answer the question. Between the state and the beauty, which was more important? Between longevity and the beauty, which was more important? If there's a woman who knows you, understands you, believes in you, loves you, is willing to do anything for you, has accompanied you since you were young, accompanied you, helped you, protected you, and gave her everything to help you, what would you do for such a woman? Just these 3 simple questions had made the group of influential members of Great Yan Dynasty feel extremely awkward. None of them could give a definite answer. Perhaps, they already had an answer in their hearts, but they also knew that this answer would never enter Yu Tan's eyes. Compared to being mocked by Yu Tan, it was better for them to keep it a secret. For these top nobles, their country was naturally more important than their beauty, and longevity was naturally more important than their beauty. Their marriages were all arranged by their families, so how could they have lovers who knew and loved each other at all costs? They were all influential figures in Great Yan Dynasty, and none of them could lower their pride and lie to their faces in front of several thousand influential members of Great Yan Dynasty. If Yu Tan asked this question to someone in a secluded corner where no one was around, these influential officials would definitely give her a flowery answer. However, since Yu Tan had asked this question in front of so many people, no one would be shameless enough to lie in public. Because of these 3 questions, the celebratory feast was completely silenced. Princess Xianglu was so angry that her face turned pale. She waited for half an hour, but none of the nobles came forward to answer Yu Tan's 3 questions. Flustered and exasperated, Princess Xianglu overturned her table, spun and returned to the inner palace. Since all the guests had left, the helpless Yan Qijuan had no choice but to announce the end of the banquet. All the nobles had no choice but to leave hastily. The 3 questions from Grandmaster of Zither, Yu Tan, had blown away all the gossip about Princess Zhang Li's celebratory feast. It looked like this would be the topic that all the nobles in Ji City would be talking about for at least half a year. Between the country and the beauty, which one is more important? Longevity and beauty, which one is more important? If there is a girl who knows me, understands me, believes in me, loves me, spares no expense for me, has been with me since I was young, accompanied me, helped me, protected me, and spared no expense to help me, for such a girl, what do I want to do for her? Escorted by a few hundred guards, Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng's coach, they were traveling slowly along the long and deep street. In front of them and at a very far distance behind them, they could see the lights of the other nobles, who were also rushing back to their own mansions. Inside the coach, Lu Qingfeng was fiddling with the small knife that he usually used to carve the formation pillars. He kept repeating the 3 questions asked by Yu Tan over and over again, as if he was deep in thought. However, Lu Qingfeng, who grew up in Lu clan, was suffering from all kinds of discrimination and persecution, and had been struggling to survive. Although he had lost his virginity to a serving lady, this so-called love did not have anything to do with him. He did not have such a beautiful girl who grew up with him since he was young, who knew him well and understood him. Just like all the other young nobles in Great Yan Dynasty, unless he was lying to his conscience, there was no way he could answer these 3 questions. Sighing lightly, Lu Qingfeng shook his head and said, Wu Qi, tell me, between the country, longevity, and beauty, which one is more important? Crossing his legs and leaning back on a soft couch, Wu Qi held an upper-grade water element energy stone tightly in his hand. While absorbing the energy from it, he sneered and said, I'll tell you, I want all of them. If I were in his shoes, I would want the empire, longevity, and beauties. Whoever dares to snatch my country, I'll kill him. Whoever dares to stop me from achieving longevity, I'll kill him. Whoever dares to touch my beauty, I'll kill him. Before I kill him, I'll castrate him first. Bear paw is what I want, and fish is what I want. I can't have both at the same time. Whoever dares to say that I can't have both, I'll chop off his dog head, and I'll get both. Lu Qingfeng nearly fainted from Wu Qi's answer. Trembling, he pointed his finger at Wu Qi. After a long while, he suddenly burst into a loud laughter and said, I have nothing to say to you. I have nothing to say to you. These 3 questions asked by Grandmaster Yu contain a great mystery, a great mystery. I have to ponder over them carefully. Could the beauty she mentioned be referring to a girl? No, she must be referring to something else. What is she referring to? Gently tapping his forehead with his fingers, Lu Qingfeng knitted his brows. He kept pondering over these 3 questions, and the more he thought about them, the more he found them to be endlessly mysterious. Therefore, the more he thought about them, the more headache he felt, and the more tangled he felt. In the end, Lu Qingfeng simply sat down with his legs crossed, like an old monk sitting in meditation. He fell into a deep meditative state, focusing all his attention on studying the 3 questions asked by Yu Tan. Wu Qi found it funny. He shook his head, sighed and said, what a bunch of innocent men. A question of a resentful woman pretending to be in her boudoir can make you so tangled? The country, longevity, and beauties. Yu Tan, this woman cultivates a strange cultivation technique, and the questions she asks are weird. Sigh, keep pretending, keep pretending. This woman, she only knows how to deceive you, a bunch of nobles who have never seen the world, by putting up a front. Shaking his head, Wu Qi didn't think much of the 3 questions asked by Yu Tan. The questions about the country, longevity, and beauties. Before he came to this world, on Earth, what was the meaning of these questions? Beauties? In the red light district of Holland, as long as you had enough money, you could get many beauties. Not to mention beauties, transvestites, perverts, and the like. If you had enough money, wouldn't you be able to hook your finger at them? All of a sudden, the procession halted. A coach came out from a small alley beside the road, blocking the path of Wu Qi and his company. The window of the coach was suddenly opened by someone. Bai Zhuer poked half of her face out from the window, waved her hand and said, Is Mr. Wu Qi here? Princess wants to see you. Hurry up, Princess is not in a good mood right now. The door of the coach moved slightly, and Wu Qi had already sprung out from the coach. With 2 leaps, he came before the coach. A faint watery mist hovered around Wuqi. Before the raindrops fell from the sky, they were knocked away by the watery mist, and none of them could touch his body. With a solemn expression, Wuqi stood beside the coach and bowed deeply. Wuqi thanks Princess. The gift that His Highness sent me last time was too heavy. A jade-like hand pressed on Bai Zhuer's face and pushed her to the side. With her long hair hanging loosely over her shoulders, Princess Xianglu frowned and poked half of her face out from the window. She glared at Wuqi, lowered her voice and scolded, "Stop talking about these things. What's so special about those things? Why are you so concerned about them? Did you hear the question from that pretentious woman today? What's your answer?" "Me?" Overwhelmed with shock, Wuqi pointed at his own nose and asked. "That's right, what's your answer?" Princess Xianglu stared at Wuqi and scolded, "Between the country and beauties, longevity and beauties, which one do you value more? Also, what's your opinion on the long list of things you know and understand at the end?" Wuqi hesitated for a brief moment. Suddenly, a 5-colored divine ray burst out from the coach. Princess Xianglu stared at Wuqi with her eyes wide open and cried out, "Tell me quickly, don't play dumb with me. You have to give me 3 answers today, or else I'll tear down Duke Yanli's mansion." After pondering for a brief moment, Wuqi looked at Princess Xianglu and smiled. He raised a finger and said with a soft voice, "The country is a man's career." Princess Xianglu knitted her brows and nodded her head slowly. In Great Yan Dynasty, the country belonged to Yan Dan, and no one dared to answer the question about the country in public. It was reasonable for Wuqi to replace the country with a man's career. Otherwise, if any influential member of Great Yan Dynasty claimed that the country belonged to him, he might be arrested and thrown into the prison by scouting office the very next day. Nodding his head, Wuqi continued, "Fame and fortune, riches and fortune, riches and fortune, an army of 10,000 miles to seek the title of Marquis. For the sake of a golden belt, a man can commit murder and arson, he can kill a lot of people. But, fame and fortune are like the vast ocean, and a man is a boat on the ocean, while the beauties that understand him are the harbor of a man. Without a harbor, a boat will sink in the storm sooner or later." The furious Princess Xianglu suddenly became happy. Her beautiful eyes narrowed into a thin line, as she looked at Wuqi smilingly and said, "The second question." Wuqi pondered for a while, then recited slowly, "What is love in the world? It makes you promise to live and die together. 2 travelers from all over the world, how many times does the old wing return to winter and summer? Joy is fun, parting is bitter, and there are even infatuated children. There should be a saying for a man, 10,000 miles of clouds, 1,000 mountains covered with snow at dusk, who is the shadow going to?" Gazing deeply into Princess Xiangli's eyes, Wuqi said with a deep voice, "Longevity is a vast sky. The blue sky stretches for 10,000 miles, and it has no end. Those who seek longevity are like a wild goose. Even if it can fly 10,000 miles high, if it loses its companion, what is the fun of being a lonely goose? It has to fly together, its cry echoing in harmony. Only then will the road of longevity not be lonely and desolate. Longevity, if there is only one person on this road of longevity, what is the point of seeking longevity?" Princess Xianglu stared blankly at him for a while. She murmured the words that Wuqi had shamelessly plagiarized, then suddenly sighed and said, "What else?" Wuqi stared at Princess Xianglu, lowered his voice and said softly, "If there is a girl who knows me, understands me, believes in me, loves me, and is willing to sacrifice everything for me, then I will love her, protect her, spoil her, obey her, and pour all my heart and soul into her. We will go through thick and thin together, helping each other in times of need, supporting each other in the vast world of mortals, never abandoning each other, never leaving each other." The 5-colored divine rays in the coach shone brightly once again, and the surrounding wind and rain stopped abruptly. Faint beams of light could be seen shooting out from behind the dark clouds. In the blink of an eye, the dark clouds above G City vanished without a trace. A bright moon hung high up in the sky, illuminating the entire Ji city with a dazzling green light. Beaming with joy, Princess Xianglu stared at Wu Qi and asked, "Is what you said true?" Wu Qi shrugged and said indifferently, "If there is, of course it's true." Princess Xiangli's eyes flickered, then she suddenly let down the curtain of the window. The palace guard who was driving the coach shushed her, then the coach sped away. Wu Qi kept staring at the direction where the coach had gone. After a while, he raised his head and looked at the bright moon in the sky. The moonlight was like water, sprinkling onto his body. Chapter 104. A ferocious gleam flashed in Wu Qi's eyes as he said with a ferocious voice, "A man has no intention to hurt a tiger, but a tiger will hurt a man. Instead of being beaten passively, why not take the initiative to tear off a piece of meat from Wei clan? With your current status and identity, as long as you can stabilize the power of Duke Yan Lu and Zhuo Guizheng, with the current emperor as the decision-maker, Wei clan won't be able to do anything to us. With the power of heaven-breaking sword sect, do you think we can't deal with a merchant clan?" Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng exchanged a glance. This girl who looked like a dark orchid had really given them the courage to refuse. Which was more important, the state or the beauty? Sighing lightly, Wu Qi straightened his body and said with a gentle voice, "Grandmaster Yu, please tell me." A girl who was known as the #1 beauty in her clan since she was young, was willing to sacrifice everything for the man she loved, the man who was known as the divine dragon among men. For the sake of his so-called great event, the girl who had a deep love for the man since she was young had been wandering around the world, playing different roles, playing out scenes of joys and sorrows, witnessing the rise and fall of one hero after another. On the wooden platform in the center of the lake in the backyard, Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng were sitting cross-legged on the ground. With a subtle expression, Lu Qingfeng was sizing up Wu Qi from top to bottom. The teacup in his hand was still full, and not even a drop of tea had been touched. Grumpily, Wu Qi gulped down 3 bowls of fragrant tea, then glared at Lu Qingfeng and said, "If you have something to say, then say it. If not, finish your tea and go rest." He, the emperor is personally selecting the soldiers. If you can't produce any results within a year, you'll have to go into secluded cultivation. The figure amidst the strong wind was none other than the Grand Master of Zither, Yu Tan, who was clad in a white cloak and had her face covered with a white veil. She was the one who asked the 3 questions during the celebration banquet in the imperial palace, which had dispersed all the influential members and ministers in the imperial court, and nearly made Princess Xianglu kill someone out of anger. It was late at night, and like a female ghost, she suddenly appeared in the backyard of Duke Yan Li's mansion together with a whirlwind. Wu Qi had no idea what she was doing here. Under the bright green moonlight, Yu Tan, who had taken off the bamboo hat, looked like a dark orchid that had bloomed quietly in a deep valley, exposing her graceful, gorgeous, and beautiful visage to Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng. This was an impeccable appearance, with a thick sweetness and a warm fragrance. Just by looking at her, it gave people the illusion that they were surrounded by flowers and their eyes were dazzled by the 5 colors. Coughing again, Lu Qingfeng said with a strange expression, "But, according to the imperial clan law of Great Yan Dynasty, a princess is not allowed to marry, and the prince consort can only marry into the prince consort's family." Shaking, Yu Tan bowed to Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng on the water surface. Wu Qi sheathed the sword of greedy wolf and returned to his seat. Although the flying sword was sheathed, Wu Qi had sneakily kept a couple dozens of explosive talismans under his sleeve, ready to unleash them at any time. Although Lu Qingfeng didn't do anything on the surface, he had secretly kept a few 9 cloud-piercing crossbows in his storage bag. Once something went wrong, he would be able to pull out the crossbows and attack the enemy immediately. The sword of greedy wolf let out a sword cry. Wu Qi looked at Yu Tan, who was standing less than 100 feet away from the wooden platform. Grinning coldly, he said, "Grandmaster Yu, this is a private mansion. It's late at night, and if there's nothing else, Grandmaster Yu, please turn back." Just like Yan Dan, such a beautiful girl had a very weary expression on her face. It was a weariness that came from deep within her bones, as if she had traveled tens of thousands of miles and spent a very long time as a vagabond. However, there was an inexplicable spirit that was supporting her. Although she was exhausted to the bone, and her heart was about to stop beating, she could still walk in the mortal world. A ferocious expression emerged on Lu Qingfeng's face as well. He crushed the teacup with one hand and said with a ferocious voice, "That's exactly what I want. Since Wei clan is trying to seize my foundation, they can't blame us for attacking them. If we want to have a firm foothold in Ji City and lay down a foundation that will last for thousands of years, we can't do that without money. Since Wei clan has brought themselves to our doorstep, they can't blame us for attacking them." Yu Tan walked slowly to the wooden platform. Soundlessly, she bowed at Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng, then sat down on the ground. Without saying anything, Wu Qi took out 2 new teacups and poured a cup of tea for both himself and Yu Tan. After thanking Wu Qi, Yu Tan took over the teacup and removed the bamboo hat weaved from her head, revealing a face that nearly suffocated both Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng. Wu Qi glared at Lu Qingfeng fiercely. Lu Qingfeng narrowed his eyes and grinned, revealing a strange smile. Without hesitation, he gulped down a few more bowls of fragrant tea and didn't say another word. Annoyed, Wu Qi threw the teacup far into the lake, murmuring, "Marry into my clan." I, Wu Qi, am a real man. Of course, I want a beautiful girl to be my wife. Asking me to marry into your clan? Impossible. A commotion broke out in Duke Yan Li's mansion. Wu Qi and his company had returned to the mansion. A group of servants busied themselves for some time, and only then did they serve Wu Qi and his company into the mansion. They went to take a bath and change their clothes. After messing around for a whole day, although Wu Qi and his companions had the cultivation of Xiantian realm, they were both mentally exhausted and physically exhausted. After taking a hot bath and changing into clean clothes, only then did they regain some of their energy. Quietly, Yu Tan picked up the teacup and took a sip of the fragrant tea. With a soft voice, she said, "My friends, do you want to hear a story? Yu Tan's purpose of coming here is to have a chat with Mr. Wu Qi, and then she will leave. Today, Yu Tan has offended Princess Xianglu, so we can't stay in Great Yan Dynasty any longer. Fortunately, there are more than 100 vassal kingdoms in Great Yan Dynasty. The world is vast, and Yu Tan has other places to go. A lady whose beauty could topple a kingdom had fallen under the sword, an invincible overlord had committed suicide in front of the people. The torrential river could not bring away the grudges and love of the mortal world, and it could not bring away the love and pity of this teenage girl. The throne, the power, the endless lifespan, the boundless ambition and lofty aspiration, the man who stood high above the masses, devising strategies, deciding the life and death of the people with just a simple gesture. Yet, this teenage girl could only struggle hard in the mortal world, barely maintaining her heart that still loved him. Between longevity and a beautiful woman, which one was more important? What a great temptation that was! Wu Qi felt every single cell in his body was trembling, sending forth the desire of love. Wisely, Lu Qingfeng shut his mouth. He tried to evade the topic and made up a few random questions, then shifted the topic to Wei Xiaoxiao. "Say, do you think sect leader Nya will kill Wei Xiaoxiao? That Wei clan has a great reputation. In the Lu kingdom, 70% of the armaments are managed by their merchant. I've long heard that Great Yan Dynasty has such a behemoth. If Patriarch Nya really kills Wei Xiaoxiao, I'm afraid we will be in big trouble." She raised her head up, smiled at Wu Qi and said, "Mister's answer has left Yu Tan speechless. I wonder if I can serve Mister, and share a night of pleasure with you." While speaking, a faint blush suddenly appeared on Yu Tan's fair and clean face that looked like a jade carving. An endless temptation came rushing at Wu Qi's face, causing all the cells in his body to stiffen. The tune of the zither was faint, yet it contained a magical force that could stir one's heart and soul. Tears gushed out from Lu Qingfeng's eyes. Suddenly, he fell to the ground, falling into a deep slumber while crying. The tune of the zither had hypnotized him, breaking down all his guard and defense, and plunging him into a sweet dream that lasted for over 1,000 years. At last, when she was so tired that her heart was about to turn into ashes, all her encounters had turned into the same 3 questions. All of a sudden, Yutan smiled. When she smiled, it was as if all the flowers under the heaven had bloomed, and the entire backyard was lit up. Putting down the teacup, Yutan gently stroked the strings of the zither. Like the drizzle of a spring night, she played a melody that was faintly discernible. Accompanied by this heartbreaking melody, Yutan used a flat voice that sounded like boiled water to briefly narrate a person's story. After a long moment of silence, Wu Qi stared at Lu Qingfeng with a strange expression, gnashing his teeth and said, "Firstly, there is nothing between me and Princess Xianglu. Secondly, even if there is something between us, it can only be her marrying me. Whether I want to marry her or not, it still depends on my mood. Thirdly, if you still want to use this matter to mock me, you better be a good boy and call me grand aunt. If you continue to talk about this matter, I'll marry into your family tomorrow. My good grandnephew. If there is a girl who knows you, understands you, believes in you, loves you, and spares no expense for you, who has been accompanying you since you were young, accompanying you, helping you, protecting you, giving everything she has to help you, what would you do for a girl like her?" Wu Qi placed both of his hands on his knees, staring at Yutan quietly. Even though he had obtained the nearly monstrous intelligence of Lu Xiaobai, he still could not figure out the background of this girl, and what kind of things she had gone through. However, her statement that sounded as flat as boiled water was filled with a fatigue that made Wu Qi want to fall into a deep sleep. While both of them were discussing the strategy to deal with Wei clan, a small whirlwind suddenly rose from the lakeside. Amidst the whistling sound of the wind, a fair and beautiful figure appeared out of thin air. Wu Qi was struck with terror. He pulled out the sword of Greedy Wolf and stood in front of Lu Qingfeng, keeping his eyes fixed on the white figure. The wild wind coiled around the white figure. Step by step, she slowly glided across the surface of the lake, bringing with her a charming charm, and walked towards the wooden platform. Now that they were talking about serious matters, Wu Qi had cast away his playful attitude, frowning and beginning to think carefully. After a long while, he said word by word, "First of all, from now on, we can only address him as master. We can no longer address him as sect leader Nye. After that, tomorrow, I want Yan Bugui to make a copy of the confidential files of Scouting Office, as well as the detailed information about Wei clan." Clearing his throat, Lu Qingfeng took a sip of tea, then said coolly, "I still have some confidence in dealing with the official matters, and it is more than enough to deal with His Majesty. But the biggest problem now is that, in terms of seniority, Princess Xianglu is my grand-aunt. If you marry into my family in the future." Drops of tears fell onto the strings of the zither. Yutan bowed her head, unconsciously stroking the strings with her fingers as she sighed and said, "Mister's answer is the most satisfactory answer I've ever heard in all these years. Therefore, I'll fulfill my promise and remove my veil, allowing Mister to have a look." Wu Qi narrowed his eyes. He couldn't sense any evil intention from Yutan. He turned his head and looked at Lu Qingfeng, who was frowning and staring at Yutan. Seeing Wu Qi's gaze, Lu Qingfeng nodded his head slowly, then said with a loud and clear voice, "Grandmaster Yu, your presence brings light to my humble dwelling. If you don't mind, please have a seat, Grandmaster Yu, and have a cup of tea." Yutan sighed lightly. She stood steadily on the surface of the water, looking at Wu Qi from afar and said softly, "Mr. Wu Qi, Duke Yanlu. Yutan has no evil intention in coming here. It's just that when Yutan left the imperial palace just now, she heard the answer from Mr. Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu. She felt something in her heart, and that's why she decided to pay a visit tonight. If I have offended you in any way, I hope both of you can forgive me." She had entered the mortal world time and time again, and left it again and again. She had fallen in love, been hurt, hated, worried, bitter, and sad. Everything was for the sake of that man. The so-called trials in the mortal world had shattered the crystal-like heart of the teenage girl. But, for the sake of his smile and praise, she had struggled in the surging mortal world again and again. Chapter 105. The green light was like water, sprinkling across the heaven and earth. Under the bright moon, Yutan slowly rose to her feet and placed the zither on the wooden platform. Her long white cloak slid down from her body like flowing water, and was soon followed by the plain and clean long dress made of white silk, and underneath the long dress was a thin undergarment that looked like it was made of nothing. Stealthily, a slender, curvaceous, fair and flawless body that looked like a combination of jade and crystal appeared before Wu Qi's eyes. A blush emerged on Yutan's cheeks, and very quickly, it spread along her slender and flawless neck, all the way to her breasts, waist, and abdomen. The seductive blush was like a delicious meat that was placed in front of a wild beast, reeking of blood. If it were any other man, he would have long leaped forward like a wild tiger, ripping this tender and delicious body into pieces. Wu Qi had his eyes fixed on this naked body, and he could not find anything wrong with it. It was a body that had gathered all the beauty of a woman. His gentle gaze glided over Yutan's delicate eyebrows, her tall nose bridge, her watery red lips, her long neck, her towering breasts, her flat abdomen without any excess flesh, her mysterious cleavage, and her two long and slender legs that were so long that not even a piece of paper could fit into them. Suddenly, Wu Qi shivered. In his spiritual ocean, the 7 holy deities and devils were roaring and roaring. Countless streams of cold air rushed out from the spiritual ocean and swept across his entire body, freezing all the cells in his body that were surging with lust. All of a sudden, Wu Qi's hazy eyes became as clear as water, and as cold as frost. With a gentle smile on his face, while admiring Yutan's flawless and beautiful body, Wu Qi said with a soft voice, "I'm sorry, but Wu Qi is cultivating the pure yang technique. My master has told me that unless I form the Jin Dan, I can't lose my virginity." Pure yang technique? With a faint smile on her face, Yutan looked at Wu Qi and said softly, "This body of Yutan is still a pure female body, which contains the innate dark yin energy. Spending one night with Yutan can increase a man's cultivation by 300 years, and it can help Mr. Wu Qi form the Jin Dan. Don't tell me Mr. isn't tempted." Wu Qi seemed to hear Lu Xiaobai's roar, "Push her down, press her down, enjoy yourself first." A strange smile appeared on Wu Qi's face. If it were Lu Xiaobai, he would have ridden on Yutan's back and galloped as fast as he could. Shaking his head, Wu Qi rose to his feet, picked up the clothes that Yutan had taken off, and gently put them on for her. While putting on the clothes for Yutan, Wu Qi said with a soft voice, "The biggest difference between humans and animals is that animals mate for the sake of reproduction. On the other hand, a human, at least a man like me, if he wants to have sex, he needs the foundation of love. This is the difference between humans and animals." He draped the cloak over Yutan's shoulders, tied the 2 straps of the cloak into a beautiful butterfly knot, then spun and walked on the water to the lakeside. He plucked a beautiful purple flower from a bunch of wisterias, then walked on the water and walked back. Wearing a smile that did not contain any evil thoughts, Wu Qi inserted the tiny, yet blooming flower into Yutan's hair, then hugged her and planted a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Grandmaster Yu is a sad person," Wu Qi said gently, "but, no matter what, as a beautiful girl like Grandmaster Yu, you have to treat yourself better. Every beautiful girl like Grandmaster Yu is a precious product that the heaven has spent all the natural energies in this world to produce. Perhaps, outsiders don't know how to protect Grandmaster Yu, so naturally, Grandmaster Yu has to take care of herself." Letting go of Yutan, who had her eyes widened in shock, Wu Qi rubbed his palms, smiled bitterly and said, "It's not easy for everyone to be born in this world. Try your best to live a happy life, eat what you should eat, drink what you should drink. Why do you have to put yourself in a difficult situation?" After a brief pause, Wu Qi gazed deeply into Yutan's panic-stricken eyes, then said with a soft voice, "Don't force yourself, don't put yourself in a difficult situation. The girl in that story is too silly. If that divine dragon really loved her, he wouldn't have hurt her like that. Whether it's a nightmare or a sweet dream, sometimes, you have to tell yourself that you will wake up from your dreams. A girl like Grandmaster Yu should have her own happiness, but it will never be me, Wu Qi, who can give you that happiness. Gently stroking Yu Tan's hair, Wu Qi said with a soft voice, ask your heart, then go find the one you truly love. Yu Tan stared blankly at Wu Qi. Her lips trembled as she said, 300 years of cultivation strength, you don't want it? You can form the Jin Dan in one day, don't you want it? The Jin Dan will be completed, and you will become a human immortal. You will be able to come and go as you please, and you will have at least 800 years of life. Are you sure you don't want it? Scratching his head, Wu Qi nodded his head and said, yes, of course, I want it. The Jin Dan will be completed, and I will have 800 years of life. Of course, I don't want it. However, as a real man, I can swindle and deceive, I can plunder the world, but if I rely on a woman to achieve my goal, that is too filthy. Although Wu Qi is a little young, Wu Qi has 2 balls between his legs. Wu Qi is a real man. Shaking his head, Wu Qi breathed out a long sigh and said, Wu Qi's name is Wu Qi. Wu, which means don't, beg, which means beg, which means beg. The name, Wu Qi, is a constant reminder to me, that even if I become a bandit, I will burn, kill, and loot, but I will never use those filthy means to achieve my goal. I can rape a girl that Wu Qi doesn't like, and use magic to gather yin energy to nourish yang energy to form the Jin Dan. But, I will not accept a weak girl who is forced to come to me and use her body to help me cultivate the Jin Dan. Yu Tan was so angry that she laughed and said, Mr. Wu Qi, your words are too profound. Yu Tan doesn't understand. Wu Qi stared into Yu Tan's eyes and said coolly, you really don't understand? Then forget it. I'm not a good man, but I'm not a bitch. Yu Tan's body trembled violently. She gazed at Wu Qi, bent down and picked up the zither. After that, she walked on the water and walked to the lakeside. A whirlwind wrapped around her body. She said coldly, Mr. Wu Qi, you've let go of an opportunity that countless cultivators yearn for. Forming the Jin Dan overnight, you've let go of this opportunity. You have to know, how many brilliant geniuses have cultivated for hundreds of years, but in the end, they became nothing but a pile of dirt. Shaking his head, Wu Qi shrugged his shoulders and smiled. He raised his head and looked at the bright moon in the sky. The green moonlight sprinkled down, as if it was shining through his body. Attracted by his innate water energy, the moonlight gradually merged into his body. The essence of the moonlight came from the moon, which was also an innate water and yin energy. At this moment, Wu Qi suddenly felt that his state of mind had improved by a great margin. He felt that his moral character had been greatly sublimated. Therefore, he suddenly understood some wonderful principles. Originally, the essence of the moonlight was extremely difficult to be absorbed by people, but now, it was slowly merging into his body. A circle of hazy green light enveloped Wu Qi's body. The innate water energy was gradually compressed, condensed, and slowly merged into his meridians. Wu Qi's meridians were strengthened at an incredible speed. In just a blink of an eye, they were 3 times stronger than before he entered the state of meditation. Yu Tan didn't hear Wu Qi's voice for a long time. She turned her head and looked back in surprise. When she saw the moonlight shining on Wu Qi's body, she couldn't help but let out a deep sigh and said, you can even gain an epiphany like this? Are you a hypocrite who deceives the world, or a simple-minded fool? Or perhaps, you're just a boorish fellow who doesn't know how to flirt? A peerless beauty, a peerless opportunity, yet you don't want both of them. Do you really have great wisdom, or are you just a stupid pig? In just a blink of an eye, all the emotions vanished from Yu Tan's body, leaving only a strong fatigue that came from deep within her bones. Slowly, Yu Tan put on the bamboo hat, and covered her face with a white veil. She murmured something under her breath, but even she herself couldn't hear what she said. Quietly looking at Wu Qi, who had fallen into the state of epiphany, Yutan breathed out a faint sigh. Wu Qi was not even 20 years old, but he had already attained the cultivation base of meridian cultivating tier of Xiantian realm. No matter he was a hypocrite, or a stupid pig, with such an innate potential and talent, he was still a rare genius in the mortal world. Sighing again, Yutan fished out a white bag from under her sleeve, from which she took out a fist-sized green jade cube. It was an extremely cold jade cube. Right after it was taken out, a large sheet of cold air immediately spread out from it. Under the moonlight, the hazy white mist looked very obvious. Wu Qi, I don't know when we'll meet again after we part this time. No matter what, you're the first strange person I've ever met. I'll give this pill to you as a token of remembrance. When we meet again in the future, perhaps I won't be Yutan anymore, but will you still be the same Wu Qi? 2 lines of tears rolled down slowly from her eyes. Shaking her hand, Yutan threw the jade cube towards Wu Qi. It was unknown whether it was done intentionally or not, but the jade cube flew straight towards Wu Qi's face, and was about to hit his nose. Wu Qi let out a strange cry as he woke up from the state of epiphany, grabbing the pale green jade cube that was emitting a strong cold air. Suddenly, Yutan's body was wrapped up by a whirlwind. She gently pressed the strings of the zither a few times, breathed out a long sigh, and drifted away. What is love in this world? It teaches you to live and die for each other. 2 travelers from the south to the north, how many times does the old wing return to winter and summer? Joy is fun, parting is bitter, and there are even infatuated children. There should be a saying for a gentleman, tens of thousands of miles of layers of clouds, the evening snow of 1,000 mountains, to whom does the shadow go? The plagiarized words that Wu Qi used to fool Princess Zhanglu came faintly from the whirlwind. When Yutan's body disappeared from the high wall, a faint sigh was heard coming from afar. Mr. Wu Qi, you're a strange man with a strange way of doing things. Yutan has learned a lot from you. The next time we meet, can you still recognize me? Wu Qi pinched the jade cube, which emitted a cold air, and crushed it. A thumb-sized, pale golden, translucent pill drifted out from the jade cube. A fragrant aroma filled the air. Wu Qi looked at the pill, which was emitting a pale golden gleam, and suddenly gasped. In Scroll of Stealing, it was ranked first among the 9th grade immortal pills, the 3 turns fire reversing Jin Dan. Regardless of one's innate talent, intelligence, or stupidity, a spirit pill that could allow a cultivator to step straight into the realm of Jin Dan from the peak of Hotian realm, had fallen into Wu Qi's hand so easily. Wu Qi stared blankly at this immortal pill, which had been described in Scroll of Stealing in a long and flowery way. He was struck dumb. With this Jin Dan of Dui, when we meet again, I will still recognize you. Without the protection of the cold jade, the medicinal strength of the Jin Dan of Dui would be completely depleted in just 15 minutes. In for a penny, in for a pound, in for a pound, Wu Qi shoved the Jin Dan into his mouth. After that, he raised his head and looked at the sky, quietly looking at the bright moon shining high up in the sky. Yutan, who exactly are you? All in all, it was impossible for them to be on this planet or this continent where Great Yen Dynasty was located, because those few magical places where the innate spirit objects of fire and earth could be formed were located in the boundless void, and not on the surface of the planet. How melancholic! Wu Qi shook his head and sighed at the sky. With the help of the Jin Dan, he had formed the Jin Dan. Before he could find any other innate spirit objects, Wu Qi could only continue nourishing his body with water element energy stones, tempering and polishing his meridians and corporeal body. Fortunately, there was no end to this tempering process. Even if he could cultivate to a higher realm in the future, the tempering and polishing of his corporeal body would always continue. The more effort he spent, the more benefits he would get. Although he could no longer improve his cultivation base, at least the tempering of his corporeal body would never stop. While he was worrying about this, Lu Qingfeng walked out from his room with a drowsy look. He was yawning all the way, asking Wu Qi if he had a good sleep last night. Last night, with the help of the immortal pill, Wu Qi had achieved his good deed, but Lu Qingfeng was enchanted by Yutan's zither music, causing him to fall into a deep sleep. Even his memory of Yutan was wiped out, and he had no recollection of what happened last night. Wu Qi laughed and joked with Lu Qingfeng for a while, but he didn't mention anything about what happened last night. That Grandmaster Yu of Zither sect, who came in a hurry and left in a bizarre manner like a ghost of the night, had been placed in Wu Qi's heart, etching her in his memory. He had a feeling that she would definitely appear in front of him again in the future. But, just like what she said, when she appeared again, would Wu Qi still be able to recognize her? In high spirits, Yan Fu busied himself inside and outside the mansion. He ordered the servants of the Duke's mansion to bring out tens of boxes of spirit stones and all kinds of precious treasures from the mansion's storehouse, and loaded them into the carriage. Just now, Lu Qingfeng had made up his mind. There was no time like the present, and he would go to Heaven-Breaking Sword sect and formally acknowledge his master today. As the Duke of Yanlu of Great Yan Dynasty, not only would Lu Qingfeng have a new backer, but Heaven-Breaking Sword sect would also have a new source of income. It was worth a careful taste. Therefore, when Lu Qingfeng formally acknowledged his master, he could never be careless. Ordinary gold, silver, and jewelry were useless to Heaven-Breaking Sword sect. What was useful were energy stones and various rare minerals. Therefore, most of the gifts Yan Fu prepared were upper-grade energy stones extracted from the energy stone mines in the 2 counties of Duke Yan Li's fief. He also prepared a lot of rare and precious materials for crafting items, such as 10,000 years dark iron, grand white gold essence, magma iron essence, and many others. Of course, apart from these energy stones and materials, all kinds of precious treasures and playthings were indispensable. For example, among the gifts, there were 3 boxes of green Ganoderma ointment, which was made from powder ground from 1,000 years old undersea frigid water droplets, mixed with Ganoderma, fleeceflower, and some other spirit herbs that were at least 1,000 years old. This was the most expensive skin care product of Great Yan Dynasty, and it was very useful even for human immortals of Jin Dan. After consuming it, it could greatly replenish one's vitality, and restore one's youthful appearance. This gift was specially prepared for Nyayaonu, as her hair had already turned white. After consuming the green Ganoderma ointment, her white hair would definitely turn black. After all, Yan Fu was the old steward of Duke Yanlu. As such, he was able to handle all the affairs in an orderly manner, and there was no need for Wu Qi and the others to worry about it. After being busy for over 2 hours, Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng brought a fleet of 100 coaches and left Ji City, heading towards Mount White Sunday. Apart from the over 1,000 personal guards brought by Lu Qingfeng from Little Meng City, there were also 300 scouting officers led by Yan Bugui, and another 2,000 iron-armored soldiers deployed from the city defense army with the medallion of scouting officers. During the palace banquet, Yan Dan flew into a rage because of the assassination of Yan Buji, and the news had spread to all the upper echelons of Great Yan Dynasty. Now that Lu Qingfeng was going to leave the city to handle some affairs, no matter it was Yan Bugui or any other related people, no one dared to be negligent. Putting aside the 2,000 iron-armored soldiers that accompanied Lu Qingfeng, there was also a troop of 10,000 cavalrymen standing by in Ji City. Once anything happened to Lu Qingfeng, this troop of cavalrymen would immediately leave the city and rescue him. However, right after the convoy left the city gate of Ji City and traveled for less than 2 miles, Yan Bugui weakly ordered a secret agent of scouting office to return to the city and deliver the message, telling the 10,000 cavalrymen who were on standby to take off their armors and rest. Lu Qingfeng would not face any danger during this trip. On the main road leading out of the city, a luxurious coach was waiting quietly in the middle of the road. A group of ferocious palace guards had blocked off the road, forcing all the merchant coaches to leave the road and take a detour through the fields on both sides of the road. There were a total of 500 fully armed palace guards, and it was an astonishing force. However, the men riding on the back of 8 golden-eyed camels were the real reason why Yen Bugue ordered all the cavalrymen in the city not to wait for further orders. They were 8 demon ghosts with beautiful faces, their bodies enshrouded in a ghostly aura, and vaguely, there was a chilly wind lingering around their bodies. Different from the demon ghosts that Wu Qi had fought on the first night he arrived at Ji City, these 8 demon ghosts had the bodies of living humans. Apart from the strange aura emanating from their bodies, they looked no different from ordinary humans. Demon ghosts with bodies like this could no longer be considered as ghosts. They had formed their ghost core, and were existences that had become ghost immortals. 8 ghost immortals who had formed their ghost core, and their cultivation base was comparable to human immortals of the Jin Dan. Wu Qi did not even need to ask to know who the men in the coach were. Apart from the most favored Princess Zhanglu of the imperial family, who had formed her Jin Dan at the young age of less than 16, who else would have such a great honor to bring 8 ghost immortals with her? On top of that, the cultivation technique of ghost immortals was the top secret inheritance of the imperial family of Great Yen Dynasty. Apart from the imperial family of Great Yen Dynasty, even someone like Chief General Jing Ku had no idea how to cultivate into a ghost immortal. With the presence of ghost immortals who had formed their ghost core, there must be some members of the strongest imperial family of Great Yen Dynasty. Which influential member of Great Yen Dynasty did not know about this rule? Suddenly, the window curtain of the coach was lifted up, and half of Princess Zhang Li's pretty face poked out from the window. Quickly, she waved at Wu Qi. Wu Qi helplessly nodded his head at Lu Qingfeng, then rode his mount and rode towards the coach. The palace guards parted to the left and right and opened up a path. Meanwhile, 8 ghost immortals were staring at Wu Qi with their ghastly eyes. 16 cold and piercing gazes made Wu Qi's skin crawl. He felt like he was walking in a graveyard in the middle of the night, and a chill ran down his spine. The pressure given to Wu Qi by any one of these 8 ghost immortals was a few times stronger than Qin Shuwen. They were definitely ghost immortals whose cultivation base was equivalent to middle stage of Jin Dan, and it was not hard to imagine the power they could unleash when they joined forces. If not because Wu Qi had successfully formed his Jin Dan with the help of the immortal pill last night, perhaps he would have fallen to the ground and lost his ability to move after being gazed at by these 8 ghost immortals. Humans and ghosts were 2 different paths, and the aura emanated from these ghost immortals was no different from a deadly poison to a living human. If not for Wu Qi having a strong cultivation base, he would have fallen to the ground and could no longer stand up. When she saw Wu Qi, Princess Zhanglu narrowed her eyes and smiled happily. These are the 8 guards given to me by my grandpa. They are much stronger than the demon ghost you met last time. Speaking of which, that demon ghost was really useless, as it was repelled by you with just 1 palm strike. How infuriating! From the window, Princess Zhanglu brought out a plate of steaming hot and fragrant pastries. She narrowed her eyes, smiled and said, "The last time you went to Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect, you must have suffered a lot. Today, I'll accompany you there. I want to see which fool dares to find trouble with you again. Have you had your breakfast?" This fragrant lotus seed cake is made from the seeds of the 5-colored fragrant lotus, which had just bloomed a few days ago. Eating a lot of it can lighten your body and replenish your energy. It's the best food for you. The 8 ghost immortals stared at Wu Qi with a stern look in their eyes, fearing that Wu Qi might do something to hurt Princess Zhanglu. Wu Qi could still bear the stares from these ghost immortals, but the subtle gossipy gazes from Lu Qingfeng, Yen Bugue, and the others in the large group behind him made Wu Qi feel as if he was being pricked by needles. It was an indescribable discomfort. Looking at Princess Zhang Li's smiling face, Wu Qi took over the fragrant lotus seed cake and said with a smile, "I've had my breakfast, but I'm a little hungry now. I'm a little hungry now. This cake is very fragrant, thank you, Princess." Grabbing a piece of cake, Wu Qi shoved it into his mouth. As expected, it was fragrant, sweet, and smooth, completely different from ordinary pastries. When Princess Zhanglu saw Wu Qi finish the cake in his mouth, her eyes narrowed into 2 fine lines. The 5-colored divine ray flickered and flickered in the coach. Suddenly, a large number of white clouds gathered in the surrounding sky, and water droplets dripped down from the sky. The red light of the rising sun shone upon them, and a few rainbows appeared above the coach. The colorful rays were dazzling, and it was an indescribable beauty. Clapping her hands happily, Princess Xianglu took over the empty plate of pastries from Wu Qi's hand, smiled and said, "All right, let's go to Mount White Sunday. Who were the people who made things difficult for you last time? Qin Shuwen and Shangguan Yuhong, right? I'm going to teach them a good lesson today." Two groups of people merged into one. The fierce and ferocious palace guards led the way in the front, bringing up a large cloud of dust as they charged towards Mount White Sunday. Chapter 107. When Princess Xianglu gave the order to recall the ghost immortals, Yan Li's flying sword nearly fell to the ground and turned into a pile of scrap iron. Hastily recalling the sword beams, Yan Li was so angry that his face turned pale. He glared at Princess Xianglu and said furiously, "Fine, fine. Dan, you. Yan Li's lips were trembling. It looked like he wanted to say some harsh words, but he didn't have the courage to do so. He stamped his feet in exasperation, spun and transformed into a wild wind, plunging into the depths of Mount White Sunday. After breaking through layer upon layer of defensive mechanisms, the company finally arrived at the core region of heaven-breaking sword sect. Nia Baihong, whose face had turned green, turned to look at Wu Qi. Wu Qi's face was also alternating between green and red, looking extremely unsightly. Both men exchanged a glance, then breathed out a heavy sigh at the same time. Nia Baihong laughed dryly and said, "I understand what Princess said. Although Wu Qi has acknowledged me as his master, I will never restrict him with the rules of the sect and the rules of seniority. Since Duke Yanlu has joined Heaven-Breaking Sword sect today, and he is going to learn the script of Heaven Patching Formation, which is a secret technique of our sect, I would like to invite Duke Yanlu to pay his respects to the ancestral master." Lu Qingfeng gazed at Wu Qi with a pitying expression, then whispered into Wu Qi's ear, "If you can marry Princess Xianglu, no one in Great Yan Dynasty will dare to offend you. Think about it carefully, I think you have a great chance." The blood-red gleam in the eyes of the few ghost immortals retracted, while the 8 sword beams retreated hastily. Greatly shocked, Yan Li had already unleashed his sword beams to fight against the ghost immortals. With just a slight collision between the few sword beams, Yan Li's golden sword beams had been suppressed and turned dimmer. Something strange happened to the ghost immortal's sword beams, as a layer of grayish-white energy had invaded them, tainting the true form of his flying sword. It made the once golden and splendid flying sword be covered with a layer of grayish-white aura, greatly weakening its power. Nia Yaonu's lips trembled for a while. At last, she laughed dryly and said, "Princess, are you here to tear down the foundation of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect?" After listening to Princess Xiangli's words, Wu Qi could only shake his head repeatedly. Princess Xianglu, who failed to teach Qin Shuwen and Shengguan Yuhong a lesson on behalf of Wu Qi, was in a very bad mood. She twitched her lips and gazed at Nia Baihong, then said with a cold voice, "Fine, nephew Baihong, you don't have to be overly courteous. Wu Qi is my good friend. Although he is your disciple, you can't put on airs in front of him. No matter what he does in heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect, nephew Baihong, you have to be more tolerant." Wu Qi wished he could strangle Lu Qingfeng to death. Suddenly, Nia Yaonu waved her hand at him and said, "Are you Duke Yan Lu Qingfeng? You've come at the right time. The heaven-mending formation art has been vacant for so many years, it's about time for it to have a successor. However, since Duke Yan Lu is the successor of our sect, then..." The word, nephew Baihong, made Nia Baihong's face turn green, and he nearly coughed out a mouthful of blood. But no matter what, he was Yan Li's son in name, and in terms of seniority, Princess Xianglu was indeed his aunt. Therefore, there was no mistake in addressing him as nephew. This was only Jin Dan's cultivation base, yet he could already possess such a powerful divine ability. If Princess Zhongli's cultivation base was a little bit higher, wouldn't her mood change be able to affect the celestial phenomena in an area of several tens of thousands of miles? The tremendous power of this divine ability was simply unheard of. Even the legendary gods could only possess such a divine ability, right? Nia Yaonu looked at the platform, which had nearly turned into a wasteland, and put on a straight face. She breathed out a long sigh helplessly and said, "Princess, please don't ride a cloud in G City. With the size of your cloud, how many young masters and princes of Great Yen dynasty would be killed by this thunderbolt?" Upon hearing this, Princess Zhongli hastily cried out, "Come back." Princess Zhongli's face blushed, and she awkwardly retracted her divine ability and dermic power. For a moment, the wind blew gently, and the clouds faded away. A couple dozens of thunderbolts once again struck down from the rapidly dispersing cloud, creating another couple dozens of large holes, each 10 feet in diameter and a few feet deep, on the platform. Only then did the dark cloud finally dissipate completely. With a five-colored gleam flickering in her eyes, Princess Zhongli stared fixedly at Yanli, whose face had turned dark, and cried out sternly, "Third brother, are Qin Shuwen, Shangguan Yuhong, and the others really in a secluded cultivation? For the next 30 years, don't let me see them anywhere near G City, or else, humph." Ugh! A stream of blood shot out from the wild wind that Yanli had transformed into. All the cultivators of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect had gathered their cultivation base in a single flying sword. When their natal flying sword was damaged, it was equal to a severe injury to their nascent divinity. Yanli had only coughed out a mouthful of blood, and it was because of his profound cultivation base. Nia Yaonu was very satisfied with Lu Qingfeng's vow. She kept nodding her head and cheering. Then, she rose to her feet, brought the company and walked around the holes on the ground, walking towards the cave where Sword Stems from the Mind was located. When they were about 100 feet away from the entrance of the cave, Nia Yaonu kept performing hand incantation gestures and unleashing one beam after another. Wu Qi narrowed his eyes, closely watching every movement of Nia Yaonu. He had memorized all the hand incantation gestures used to open the defensive formation. Although they could not use any magic to travel, Zhang Hu and Hu Wei, who were the weakest among them, had the overall strength of peak stage Hotian realm. Therefore, they could travel at a very fast speed. In just 1 hour, they had arrived at the bottom of the cliff behind the mountain. When they arrived at this place, all the guards were left at the bottom of the cliff. In high spirits, Princess Zhongli summoned a large sheet of watery clouds and strong wind. Accompanied by thunder and lightning, she brought Wu Qi, Lu Qingfeng, and Nia Baihong to the top of the cliff. Together with Yanli, the current sect leader of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect, Nia Baihong, also came out to welcome Princess Zhongli. Seeing that the ghost immortal guards serving Princess Zhongli were trying to kill Yanli, Nia Baihong spun and left, running as far away as he could. From afar, he saw 8 grayish-white sword beams thrust towards Yanli. His face was filled with a smile, and he couldn't conceal the gloating expression on his face. After leaving a large group of guards at the front mountain of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect and letting the disciples of Sword sect take good care of them, Wu Qi and a group of several dozens of men accompanied Lu Qingfeng to the cave abode of Sword Stems from the Mind, at the back mountain. Last time, Wu Qi was brought to the main peak of the back mountain by Nia Yaonu with a magic and divine ability. But this time, as Princess Zhongli was here, who would dare to play any tricks in front of her? The group could only walk along the winding path, enjoying the beautiful scenery along the way as they rushed to the main peak. Although there was something wrong between Princess Zhongli and Yanli, she seemed to have a very good relationship with Nia Yaonu. She stuck out her tongue, and showed a rare vivacious attitude of a teenage girl. She skipped and came next to Nia Yaonu, quickly massaging her shoulders and massaging her back, soothing her breathing. Don't be angry, Sister Yaonu. It's just a few broken pine trees. How many do you want? You can go to Zhongli Park and dig them up yourself. Dan has just formed the Jin Dan, and wanted to try the ability of riding on clouds. Who knew it would turn out like this? Seeing that Yan Li was driven away by Princess Xianglu, Nia Baihang smilingly brought a few trusted elders and disciples to greet Princess Xianglu in a courteous manner. The hand incantation used by Nia Yaonu to break the defensive formation was recorded in the Scroll of Stealing. After witnessing Nia Yaonu's actions, Wu Qi had gained a thorough understanding of all the defensive formations in the Immortal's Cave of Sword Stems from the Mind, and there was nothing he could not understand. Lu Qingfeng and the others were struck dumb. Yan Li was the third son of Yan Qijuan, and also the third brother of Princess Xianglu. How could she kill him just like that? Nia Yaonu, who was sitting on an ancient pine tree and regulating her breath, opened her eyes in surprise, staring blankly at Princess Xianglu, who was standing on top of the dark cloud. Fortunately, Wu Qi had a clear mind. He grabbed Princess Xianglu and cried out, "You can't do that. Elder Yan Li is the Grand Elder of Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect. You can't kill him. It's fine if you cut off a few of his arms and legs, but you can't kill him. Princess, he is your third brother. If you kill him, no matter if it's the Crown Prince or His Majesty, you won't be able to explain it to them. These few Ghost Immortal Guards were just given to you by His Majesty. If you take them back like this, it will not be good for you." Upon hearing what Princess Xianglu said, Yan Li couldn't help but fly into a rage. He cried out loudly, "Zidan, this is Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect. Don't you dare act presumptuously here." Speaking of which, even Wu Qi was surprised by what kind of power Princess Xianglu had inherited from her mother. Once the 5-colored divine rays behind her back moved, they would be able to stir up the surrounding energies of 5 elements. Along with the change of her mood, the surrounding phenomena would change accordingly. When other Jin Dan immortals rode on a cloud, it would be a cloud that behaved itself, but the cloud summoned by Princess Xianglu was filled with flashing lightning and rumbling thunder, accompanied by a heavy downpour. The power was simply too frightening. Qin Shuwen and Shengguan Yuhong were both in seclusion. All the sect elders of Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect who had a conflict with Wu Qi last time, except for Yan Li, who came out to greet Wu Qi with a dark face, all the other sect elders of Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect were in seclusion. Princess Xianglu, who accompanied Wu Qi to Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect in high spirits, prepared to brutally humiliate Qin Shuwen and the other sect elders to help Wu Qi vent his anger, was greatly disappointed. Her sunny mood suddenly turned dark. The 5-colored divine rays behind her back stirred into a ball of chaotic halos, and immediately, Mount White Sun was shrouded by dark clouds. The strong wind rolled the dark clouds, and the thunder was accompanied by the lightning. The dark clouds, which were dozens of acres in circumference, brought everyone up the cliff, and landed on the platform in front of the Cave of Sword Stems from the Mind. When the dark clouds reached a height of several tens of feet above the platform, a few thunderclaps echoed out, followed by several dozens of lightning bolts striking down. The ancient pine trees on the platform, which had been growing for countless years, were instantly turned into ashes by the lightning bolts. Nia Yaonu seemed to want to say something, but stopped on second thought. After listening to the story of Nia Yaonu from Wu Qi, Lu Qingfeng had already understood the mystery behind it. Hastily, he took a few steps forward, bowed deeply at Nia Yaonu and said, "Qingfeng is not someone who would betray my master. Naturally, Qingfeng will obey the order given by my master. I can swear to the heaven that if my master needs my help, even if I have to sacrifice my life, I will never disobey the order given by my master." Princess Xianglu was very angry, and the consequences would be very serious. Layers of dark clouds were hovering above Mount White Sunday. Indistinct thunderbolts kept streaking across the sky above everyone's head. Tiny electric arcs were seen rolling and rocking in the dark clouds, while a whirlwind rose from the ground, bringing with it a pungent smell of water that soared straight into the sky. All the disciples of Heaven-Breaking Sword Sect had gone into hiding in various palaces, pavilions, and caves where they had their secluded cultivation. None of them dared to show their faces. 8 streams of ferocious energy soared into the sky, while the sky was filled with the endless howls of ghosts. The eyes of 8 ghost immortals standing next to Princess Xianglu shone with an eerie red gleam. Chi-Chi took a step forward, locking Yan Li with his powerful divine will. One of the ghost immortals cried out with a gloomy voice, "Disrespect to the princess. Die!" Accompanied by the howl of ghosts that sounded like it came from the netherworld, 8 vague and twisted grayish-white sword beams shot out from the ghost immortals' bodies, bringing with them a large sheet of ghost flame and phosphorescence as they thrust towards Yan Li's head. It would have been better if she did not say that. Upon hearing Nia Yaonu's sentimental words, Princess Zhang Lu suddenly realized something and said, "Sister Yaonu is right. In the future, whoever dares to provoke me in Ji City can just go straight to his ancestral mansion and ride on a cloud. It will save me from having to deploy my army into the city to kill him, and also waste the army's pay and money." Chapter 108. Generally speaking, a Hotian cultivator could control a formation constructed from 1 to 3 array pillars, known as the One Origin Formation to 3 Talents Formation. A Xiantian Taoist could control 4 to 6 array pillars, known as the 4 Symbols Formation to 6 Directions Formation. And a Jin Dan Realm human immortal could control 7 to 9 array pillars, known as the 7 Stars Formation, 8 Trigrams Formation, and 9 Palaces Formation. An Earth immortal of nascent soul realm could control 10 to 12 array pillars, known as the 10 Elements Formation, Unity Formation, and Origin Formation. Above 12 array pillars, there were the 13 stars of the Northern and Southern Dipper, the 28 Mansions, the 36 Heavenly Dipper, the 49 Dian, and the 72 Earthly Fiends. This was a formation that could only be controlled by a Heaven Immortal of nascent Dipper realm. Above Heaven Immortals were Gold Immortals, who could deploy a formation based on the 360 stars in the sky. The greater the number of array pillars, the greater the yuan qi of heaven and earth that could be gathered, and the changes of the formation would be more complicated. Therefore, the power of the formation would be greater. According to the legends, a formation constructed by a golden immortal corresponding to the 84,000 stars in the sky, using tens of thousands of array pillars and array instruments as the core, had the terrifying power to destroy a part of the void and annihilate a part of the stars. For example, Lu Qingfeng, who had just met Wu Qi, was a peak Hotian cultivator, and the formation he could control was at most 3 array pillars. The 3 Talents Formation was the limit that a peak Hotian cultivator could control. Now that Lu Qingfeng was a Taoist of respiration tier, the maximum number of array pillars he could control was 6. Not only did the 6 array pillars increase the gathering speed and capacity of the yuan qi of heaven and earth by 10 times, it also increased the changes and mysteries of the formation by 100 times. Because Lu Qingfeng specialized in formations, when he entered the cave abode of sword stems from the mind, he had his eyes wide open, trying to see through the mysteries of the formations inside and outside the cave abode. But even though his eyes were sore and tearing up, he could only see 2 or 3 possible locations for the erection of the formation pillars and the formation artifacts. As for the specific appearance of the formation restrictions inside and outside the cave, he could not see the slightest bit of meaning. Wu Qi, on the other hand, was able to see through the array formations and restrictions inside and outside the cave. Outside the cave were 3 major formations, the 7 Stars Formation, the 8 Trigrams Formation, and the 9 Palaces Formation. There were a total of 24 array cores. The array pillars and the array guarding artifact were all lower-grade magic treasures, possessing a very strong defensive power. Furthermore, the formation mainly focused on illusion attacks and mazes. After entering the entrance of the cave, a Heavenly Dipper and Earthly Fiend Great Formation with 108 formation cores was set up in the 360m long passageway. Only Heaven Immortals with phenomenal success in their nascent divinity could set up this formation, and only they would have enough energy to activate it. Among the 108 formation cores, 12 of them were actually emitting fluctuations of spiritual energy unique to mid-grade magic treasures. This great formation of heavenly spirits and earthly evils was in accordance with the 4 symbols. It connected the heavenly stars above and the earthly chi below. It covered the entire main peak of Mount White Sunday. It was a formation that focused on defense and assisted with killing. According to Wu Qi's estimation, if someone with sufficient overall strength were to control it, this formation could withstand the attack of a heaven immortal, and could easily kill an earth immortal of peak stage nascent soul realm. However, what made Wu Qi glad was that there was no one controlling this formation. It seemed like Nia Yaonu had only obtained the method to pass through this formation, but did not obtain the essence of controlling it. Therefore, this powerful formation was just a dead formation mentioned in the Scroll of Stealing. A dead formation was a formation that could be passed through as long as one knew the method to pass through it with his eyes closed. With Wu Qi's current cultivation base of early-stage Jin Dan realm, he could easily pass through this kind of dead formation by doing a somersault after getting drunk. Wu Qi could not help but shake his head. The immortal who left behind the legacy of heaven-breaking sword sect was a very strange person. He had constructed such a powerful formation, but he did not leave behind all the methods to control it, and only left behind a dead formation. Apart from a cultivator like Wu Qi who had inherited the Scroll of Stealing and was an expert in the art of formations, as long as he did not have an extremely bad luck, this formation would not stop any ordinary early-stage nascent soul earth immortal from passing through it. Unless that immortal was sure that no one above nascent soul realm could discover this place, there was no reason for him to leave behind a dead formation. Strange, this was really strange. This formation gave Wu Qi a very strange feeling. Even if that immortal had left behind his legacy, this formation could still be activated with its full power, as long as he left behind a door for his successor who met the requirements to enter and exit it. There was no need for him to leave behind a dead formation, was there? Following closely behind Nia Yaonu, Wu Qi observed the method she used to open the formation. His eyes were darting from side to side, and he could clearly see the positions of all 108 formation cores in the formation. Currently, he only had the Sword of Greedy Wolf, which was a lower-grade magical treasure. However, there were 96 lower-grade magical treasures and 12 middle-grade magical treasures in this formation. It made his heart itch. As a member of the Underhand sect, Wu Qi's professional habit had kicked in. He wished he could strike right now and obtain everything in this dead formation. The 3,060 feet tunnel was not a long one. Very soon, they walked out of the formation and arrived at a strange space in the belly of the mountain. It was a magnificent immortal's cave, measuring over 500 acres in circumference. There was a small bridge over a flowing stream, a garden with herbs growing in it, and the surrounding walls were made of mountain rocks that looked as white as jade. Pure white light shone out from the rocks and walls, illuminating the entire place as bright as day. A breeze came blowing from the front. Right at the exit of the tunnel was a small river. The riverside was filled with weeping willows. Their long branches were swaying gently in the breeze, and a faint fragrance of flowers was wafting out from them. Lu Qingfeng was struck dumb. When had he ever seen a blessed land of immortals like this? It was a completely sealed mountain, and yet, there was a strange little world of its own. Such a method had gone beyond his imagination. On top of that, the natural energy here was at least 30 times denser than the outside world. The natural energy here had condensed into white clouds that could be seen with naked eyes. What flew above their heads and intertwined with their feet were all very dense natural energy. Even the water flowing in the small river had turned into a sticky liquid that looked like wine paste after being soaked by the extremely dense natural energy. If brought to the outside world, a river like this could be directly consumed as a panacea, which could cure almost all diseases. And here, there was a river that measured about 2 miles long and 30 feet wide, and was filled with the same kind of water. Wu Qi pretended to be in a daze, staring fixedly at the unbelievable scene before him. There was a detailed description of such a scene in Scroll of Stealing. There were 36 tiers of heaven immortals, and any heaven immortal of the standard tier, even the weakest heaven immortal of the 36th tier, had the ability to exercise a divine ability that allowed them to construct a small world with a perfect natural environment in a narrow space like the belly of a mountain or underground. This was an ability that any heaven immortal could possess. A small world with the circumference of 500 acres could at most be constructed by a heaven immortal of the 36th tier, and it could not be considered as a formidable figure. If it were a small world constructed by a first-tier heaven immortal, it would have the size of a continent. That would be a real minor kiliocosm, and it could not be compared with this tiny cave abode. As for the 18th tier gold immortal, the cave abode constructed by them would be no different than a planet. However, as a Taoist of Xiantian realm, Wu Qi had to act like a daze, or at least, he had to look the same as Lu Qingfeng. Otherwise, it would be too suspicious. Nia Yaonu gazed at Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng, who were in a daze, and a contented smile emerged on her face. Senior, the magical power and divine ability of Master Immortal are far beyond the imagination of us juniors. This is the core area of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect. Apart from me, only Baiheng, Zidan, and a few of my trusted disciples have come here before. Come, you will have plenty of chances to come here and cultivate in the future. Now, follow me and pay your respects to the ancestral master. Wu Qi shuddered and woke up from his dazed state. He pulled Lu Qingfeng forcefully. Only then did Lu Qingfeng take a deep breath and praise in a low voice, "The blessed land of immortals is indeed extraordinary. Although the main peak of Mount White Goat does not look very wide, I can't believe there is such a vast world in the belly of the mountain. It is indeed the means of immortals, which is not something we mortals can imagine." With a complacent smile on her face, Nia Yaonu brought Wu Qi and the company through the willow forest, crossed the river through a small bridge carved out of white jade, went past a few flower beds and herb gardens, and finally came to the front of an ancient-looking pavilion located right in the middle of the cave. The pavilion was 3 stories tall, and a horizontal board was hung on top of it. 4 large characters of Peerless Sword Formation were carved neatly on it. A few young men and women were seen working in front of the pavilion, carefully wiping the stairs and railings with white cloths. When they saw Nia Yaonu and her company coming in, they bowed and greeted her from a distance. But, they did not come close to her, and just continued with their work wholeheartedly. Wu Qi gave these few young men and women a glance. With his eyesight, he could tell that 4 of them had the cultivation base of Jin Dan realm. According to Haoying Fengying, there were 36 Jin Dan realm elders in the Elder Council of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect, and 27 of them were leaning towards Yanli. Therefore, Yanli had the real power in Heaven-Breaking Sword sect. However, judging from the cultivation base of these few young men and women, there were 4 Jin Dan realm elders here, and there were also several dozens of exquisite pavilions and houses in the cave. Vaguely, ripples of energy could be sensed coming out from these pavilions and houses. Obviously, someone was having a secluded cultivation in there. From this, it could be seen that Nia Yaonu had an enormous hidden power, which was not something that Haoying Fengying and his company could guess. Whether or not Yanli really had the real power in Heaven-Breaking Sword sect, this was a question that needed to be carefully considered. It was not the actual strength that was exposed, but the power that was hidden in the dark like Nia Yaonu. With the natural energy in the cave, which was 30 times denser than the outside world, it was actually not a difficult task to cultivate a group of Jin Dan realm cultivators. Wu Qi turned his head and gave Princess Xianglu a look. Since Nia Yaonu could allow Princess Xianglu to come into this cave, it seemed like both of them had a pretty good relationship. Nia Yaonu washed her hands in a basin carved out of jade and tidied up her appearance. With a solemn expression, she led the group into the pavilion. Upon entering the pavilion, Wu Qi immediately saw an altar placed at the far end of the pavilion. On top of it were incense burners, candlesticks, and some other utensils. A portrait of an immortal with a blurred face was hung neatly on the wall. The immortal was riding on a strange-looking flood dragon, holding a sword in his left hand, and an 8 trigrams formation in his right hand. Obviously, he was an immortal who cultivated in both sword and formation techniques. Apparently, the words Peerless Sword Formation on the outside of the pavilion had its origin. With a solemn expression, Nia Yaonu pointed at the portrait and said, "This is the ancestral master of Heaven-Breaking Sword sect, Immortal Zhenyi. Qingfeng, Wu Qi, follow me and pay your respects to him." Wu Qi nodded his head, then followed Nia Yaonu and walked towards the altar. After taking a few steps forward, Wuqi's body suddenly trembled. Instinctively, he turned his head to look at the ceiling of the pavilion. A six-edged palace lantern was hung on the ceiling of this pavilion. The flame inside the lantern was dazzling, and the faint green light shone brightly on the entire floor of the pavilion. However, Wuqi could clearly sense the aura of earth, wood, and fire, three innate spirit items, coming out from this palace lantern. Wuqi needed to find the innate spirit items of the other four quadrants before he could continue his cultivation, and there were three of them in this palace lantern. Wuqi's eyes darted back and forth. He was so touched that he nearly shed tears. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.